Prairie Home Companions. As a native of South Dakota, I've always thought the state song should be the cackle of a rising pheasant. When I grew up on the prairies, it was the wake-up call every kid in the state with a Winchester Model 12 or a Remington pump wanted to hear. The birds transformed cornfields, bluestem, and cattails into magical places where memories with family and friends were made, where my roots grew deep. While I spent my career in the big city, a piece of me never left my Dakota home. When autumn arrives, the bar and coffee shop conversation quickly turns to, "How's the hatch?" or "How's your pup coming along?" Opening day of pheasant season is an unofficial holiday in South Dakota. People from across the globe now descend on the state each fall to experience the electric rise of cackling roosters and the camaraderie of others who share a passion for the royal flush of a pheasant. My dad didn't hunt, so I depended on the fathers of pals and a neighbor who had a sweet double-barrel 410, which suited my 12-year-old swing. Of all the iconic opening days among American sporting pursuits, mallards amid the flooded timber of Arkansas, whitetail season in Pennsylvania, quail in Georgia, or perhaps doves in Texas, none mean more to any state than do pheasants to South Dakota. Through my college years, by which time I had graduated to a Remington 20-gauge pump, I arranged class schedules to match the noon start for shooting. By Thanksgiving, my roommate and I had enough birds in the locker to throw a big pheasant feed for our faculty, which helped when grading time came. Since those long ago years, I've shot quail on antebellum plantations across the South, doves in Africa, Hungarian partridge and sharptails in Montana, and ducks in Maryland. Today, my native South Dakota is checkerboarded with private shooting resorts, including the legendary lodge of the late Paul Nelson. It was here where Chris Dorsey and I first hunted birds together because the Nelson family were mutual friends of ours. Chris produced a fly fishing series that I hosted for a decade, so I got to know his passion for angling through our time on the water. However, he grew up a fellow Midwest kid who cottoned to good bird dogs and upland birds early on. When he joined me on my Montana ranch years later to pursue Hungarian partridge, it was easy to see that he knew his way around a bird field as much as anyone with whom I've ever hunted. Given as much time as he's spent pursuing birds on every continent of our planet, he's as handy with a shotgun as you might imagine. It's his love of the places, birds, dogs, and fellow bird hunters, however, that shines through this book. When I read these chapters, it rekindled the emotions and endearing elements that first drew me to the wingshooter's way of life. While his adventures are sometimes far-flung and exotic, shooting-driven guineafowl as elephants charge, getting inside the rituals of driven grouse on the Yorkshire moors, or painting the portrait of a breaking dawn on the pampas of Argentina, this book gets to the heart of the wingshooting game in ways few others do. But it's not an esoteric read, for Chris returns to the familiar and shares the wonder of game birds that shaped his hunting life, from ruffed grouse and woodcock in the Great Lakes, to quail in Georgia where he lived after college, to ringnecks across the Dakota and Iowa farmscapes, to the waterfowl wonderland of the prairie pothole country of Western Canada. He is at heart a bird hunter, and these journeys and this book showcase that through his command of the written word. As you read this book, you'll want to plot your next wingshooting foray. I confess that I enjoy the care and feeding that goes with a lodge, but when I return to South Dakota's backroads, I still find myself wanting to reach for my old pump when I see a rooster settling into a corn row or marsh grass. Shotgun, game birds, sunny autumn days. I trust heaven will have all that. And so too does this book. Tom Brokaw. We interrupt this pheasant hunt. You can take the news anchor out of the country, but eventually he'll find his way home. Tom Wolfe was adamant that one can never go home again. For South Dakota native Tom Brokaw, as he returns to his rural roots to walk the pheasant fields of the prairies, however, it seems obvious that he never truly left. The state draws him back most autumns for what he describes as a religious holiday in these parts, a pastime most who grew up here celebrate come October. Welcome to Pheasant Hunting Central, a bird in a state whose brands have become synonymous. Even at his busiest sitting at the anchor's desk of NBC News for more than 20 years, longer than Walter Cronkite at CBS, Brokaw managed annual pilgrimages to South Dakota to remind his labs why he was feeding them in his Manhattan studio the other 11 months of the year. As Brokaw tells it, however, given the choice between keeping him or one of his labs, he's not certain which his wife, Meredith, would choose. Much of South Dakota is a pheasant pasture owing to an ideal mix of grasslands, food crops, and shelter belts that sustain and protect the birds throughout the state's seasonal weather extremes. There are, however, a handful of places where the bird transcends the wingshooting lifestyle. One such destination is the 5,000-acre Paul Nelson Farm, an understated phone book name for a retreat that was created on a passion for pheasant hunting. This isn't one of those quaint lodges for 6 or 8 guns at a time, but rather is closer to the Taj Mahal of featherdom. Several years ago, a catastrophic fire could have ended the Nelson story when the lodge was burned to the ground. Americans like comebacks, however, so Paul and his son Eric took the event as their cue to rebuild the place even bigger and better than before. Some might contend that they got a little carried away, but the great ones often do. Today it has the amenities of a luxe resort with the food of a Michelin restaurant. It wears the crown of one of the world's great wing-shooting destinations. And all things considered, it just might be the best, if the Orvis-endorsed Lodge Awards are any measure. Throughout the expansive 2-story campus, there are cigar lounges, private bars, poker tables, and giant television screens that make the place one enormous and opulent man cave. Everywhere you look, there are reminders of the birds, mounts, paintings, and photographs, along with all manner of South Dakota artifacts from bison skulls to ancient native tools. A nearby jet strip makes it easy for the corporate set to arrive, do deals while toting a shotgun through thousands of acres of idyllic pheasant cover, and return easily to their home ports. During the Bush-Cheney years, the vice president was a frequent visitor, famously shutting down the airspace around the capital of Pierre as Air Force Two arrived for the pheasant opener, the unofficial New Year on the Dakota calendar. Pheasants have effectively become a form of currency in South Dakota, luring more than 100,000 non-resident hunters from across the globe each autumn to dawn blaze and march lockstep through the cornfields, grasslands, and shelter belts, looking like angry Cleveland Browns fans searching for the owner who left town with the team. The birds are now such a part of the fabric of the state that it's hard to imagine this landscape without them. While prairie chickens and sharptails were the only upland birds to greet Lewis and Clark's Corps of Discovery, the Asian imports have since supplanted the indigenous birds, both in numbers and significance. The first successful introduction of pheasants dates back to the late 1800s in the Willamette Valley of Oregon. Pheasant hunters now contribute nearly $300 million annually to the state's economy as they harvest some 1.2 million of South Dakota's estimated 9 million pheasants. I first got to know Brokaw while producing a fly fishing television series with the conservation organization Bonefish and Tarpon Trust for ESPN and later Outdoor Channel. Brokaw was the ringleader of this band of angling brothers. The cast included notables who had a passion for flats fishing and the stories, humor, and camaraderie that go with such forays. These were mostly pals who included Michael Keaton and novelist Tom McGuane, Brokaw's Montana neighbors, as well as his longtime friend and Patagonia founder Yvon Chouinard, Huey Lewis, Liam Neeson, Jimmy Kimmel, Jim Belushi, and the indomitable Lefty Kreh, the larger-than-life 5-foot, 3-inch fly fishing sensei. Of all the historic bromances, Cassidy and Sundance, Seinfeld and Costanza, McCain and Graham, after nearly a decade of filming Buccaneers and Bones, Kreh and Brokaw became like brothers who had been separated at birth, but through fishing providence, were reunited later in life and made up for lost time. While every celeb who joined the cast wanted to be on Kreh's dance card and have a chance to spend a day on the water with the angling legend, it was Kreh who always wanted to get time with Brokaw. For a guy who gave voice and context to the greatest generation, it was probably ordained that Brokaw would come to admire Lefty's life story, from surviving the Battle of the Bulge and a bout with anthrax to teaching a generation of Americans how to fly fish. I've met a lot of people in my life who came with big billing, Brokaw once told me, on a fishing trip to the Bahamas. Most didn't live up to their reputations. Lefty, on the other hand, far exceeded his. As we begin to hike a long row of millet, a rooster erupts from Brokaw's right, quartering to the left. He folds the bird in what amounts to a reflex, just like countless others he's shot since his youth in the state. He pumps his fist and smiles in celebration, an affirmation that while the years may have taken a step or two, There's still plenty of punch left in the South Dakota kid. When I come out here and do this, I feel like I'm 15 years old again, he says. I'm connected to this prairie in a way that I didn't anticipate I would be when I left 50 years ago. I live in cities now and travel the world, but I keep coming back here because I know this is where I belong. Being on the front lines of history for much of his adult life, he covered, sometimes lived, every major global story for more than 2 decades, including famously being the only anchor in Berlin for the fall of the wall and, ostensibly, the collapse of the Soviet Empire. Before the proliferation and noise of cable news, there were only 3 broadcast networks. With that came large audiences and the gravity of being invited into many of America's living rooms each night to sometimes deliver news that he knew would change the world forever. In times of war and peace, crisis and tragedy, he was the man to whom millions of Americans turned to hear it straight, good or bad. As a photographer friend once said, no matter how sad, tragic, or frightening the news might seem, you felt like you could get through it when it came from Brokaw. His sincerity is born out of growing up around Midwestern stock who cared deeply about each other and mostly never had time for bullshit. It was that sense of audience that he forever carried with him, which became his built-in barometer of a nation. It served him well, for he's won every award possible, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom. People out here don't accept egos, he says as we walk. Besides, I have a wife and 3 daughters, and they don't have time for an ego either, he jokes. Also joining us on this hunt are some guys named John Thune and Jeff Crane. That would be U.S. Senator Thune, the pride of Murdo, South Dakota, population 482. Crane runs the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, a hunting fishing advocacy group that works on the Hill as well as at state houses nationwide. Thune looks like he's out of central casting, tall, handsome, and well-mannered. He's the type of polite and kind soul that the good people of South Dakota produce. He is, in a word, representative. Spend time talking with him, however, and it's hard to picture his gentle demeanor enduring the swamps of Washington. But like others before him, he's learned to separate reality from Washington. As with Brokaw, he's another South Dakota kid who's handy with a shotgun, exacting his own form of tariffs on the state's Chinese imports. Of all the states where ringnecks thrive, only South Dakota has embraced pheasants and pheasant hunting in such a way to own the undisputed label of pheasant capital. Great lodges are scattered throughout the state, each offering their own take on the pheasant hunting experience, which has reinforced South Dakota as the pheasant hunter's destination of choice. What you often get in South Dakota that you don't see with the same regularity in other states with ringnecks is the spectacle of hundreds of birds airborne at once. As a line of guns pushes through cover, the theater of an avalanche of birds cascading out of habitat with a cacophony of pheasant cackles is the kind of take-your-breath-away embarrassment of riches that reminds you that the Dakota Prairie is where any bird hunter wants to be come October. As we reach the end of our long push, Brokaw's lab, Red, locks up like a short hair, pointing a bird that opts to sit tight rather than run ahead with the others. I have seen plenty of pointing labs over the years, but most were the flash point variety, pausing only briefly before the flushing instinct eventually overrode the initial inclination to point. Not so with Red, for I first saw the strength of his pointing instinct while joining Brokaw at his Montana ranch, where we hunted Hungarian partridge a couple of years earlier. It was clear then that Red hadn't read the flushing dog manual, for he was as steady to wing as even the staunchest of pointers. "Get ready, Red's got one here," says Brokaw as the senator and I ease up. With the line in position, Brokaw moves ahead and flushes one rooster, which initiates a chain reaction of perhaps a dozen more birds flushing from nearby cover, launching randomly like feathered missiles. We make the most of the opportunities, sending enough roosters to earth to keep Red and the other labs in the group busy for several minutes. As we return to the lodge, I ask Brokaw about life as a hunter in the big city. "My New York friends sometimes ask me if I hunt," he says with a wry smile. "I tell them that I do, and I love it. We eat what we kill, and it's been a part of my life and has been a part of this country for a long time. It's great for the economy and for conservation. It's a win-win." That's especially true if your wife is Meredith Brokaw, wild game chef and celebrated cookbook author. While Brokaw isn't a big game hunter, that doesn't mean he won't enjoy an elk tenderloin from an animal taken off his ranch. A few years ago, I joined Tom and Meredith for dinner at their Montana home along the banks of the West Boulder River. It was clear that they never let go of their simple Midwest roots. In fact, they embraced them. The home, while a beautifully restored farmhouse, was comfortable and welcoming. It wasn't the elaborate stone and timber frame mansion that I had imagined broadcast news anchor, best-selling author Tom Brokaw might have. Instead, the ranch consisted of a compound of smaller guest houses and outbuildings. Under a small grove of fruit trees were generous piles of black bear scat, for the animals moved in each night to feed on ripe apples and plums, apparently in droves. Behind the main house was a small cabin, Tom's writing quarters, where parts of several of his books and articles were written. The 200-acre ranch, however, was a stunning piece of the West, with remarkable numbers of partridge and giant elk, the racks collected by his longtime ranch manager, Doug Campbell, gathering dust in one of the barns. "Do you realize how big these elk are?" I asked, stunned by their record book dimensions and dropping the not-so-subtle hint that I would be available to hunt elk here, even if it meant surrendering the meat to Meredith's table. With elk that size, I had to try. "I know they taste good," he responded, ignoring my hint for an invite, as if he hadn't heard that one before. Returning to the Nelsons' sprawling lodge for dinner after our day of pheasant chasing, we are confronted with a gastrogasm for its prime rib night at the Paul Nelson farm, which means it's time to loosen the belts and prepare to founder. Eric and Paul tend to the carving station to slice a slab of beef the size of a small calf, whatever temperature that suits your taste. In the corner of the dining room is Paul's wife, Cheryl, strumming a harp. It all begs the questions, where the hell am I, and how do I make sure that I never have to leave? If there's anything that Brokaw has failed at in his life, it's retirement. Not even a multiple myeloma diagnosis, a form of incurable but treatable bone cancer, could slow him down. While that news altered the course of his life, it led him to write a book about his health experiences, which in turn helped others going through similar challenges. Now, thanks to advancements in the treatment of that cancer, there isn't much interruption in the life of Tom Brokaw. He continues to add to a resume that has no more room, currently working on a book about his father, while making sure his new lab, Doc, is just as spoiled as his predecessors. And that's a good thing, because soon it'll be time to return to South Dakota and, with luck, the Paul Nelson farm. Home Sweet Covey. One community in the South Carolina Lowcountry is living proof that birds of a feather indeed flock together. Some people are Presbyterians, others are born into the Catholic faith. If you only drink alone, you might be a Baptist. In the South, the rest become quail hunters. For the bobwhite denomination, who study the scriptures of Babcock and Buckingham, and who worship at the altar of Briars and Switch, there is a community built on a solid foundation of feathers. Just a pointer's cast from Yemassee, South Carolina's Old Sheldon Church, the historic landmark first burned by the British in 1779 and later by Sherman in 1865, sits a community where Gentleman Bob is revered like no other. The place is called Bray's Island Plantation, and enter the gate with its live oak-lined runway, and there is an immediate sensation that you're traveling back in time to a genteel period where decorum wasn't just appreciated, it was expected. People who come here to live are drawn by this landscape and its ghostly Spanish moss, garnished live oaks, tidal waterways brimming with sea trout, redfish, and a couple million years ago, megalodon, the prehistoric shark whose fossilized teeth are still found throughout the area's channels. Then there are the sprawling quail fields, pointers and cockers eager for work, horse trails that serpentine through the landscape, and a gun club where shooters who might have lost a step over the years can still find their groove with conversation over a cigar. As Winston Churchill once wrote, "We shape our dwellings, and afterwards our dwellings shape us." When you first experience this community, it's clear that what the residents can't get enough of is each other. Souls from many points on the globe mostly live their passion for artfully engraved double guns, bird dogs that could read their minds, and endless flushes in relative isolation, just a few close friends and family with whom to share this way of life. Then, like the lost tribe of Judah, they made the pilgrimage to Bray's, a whole community of feather dusters who can talk dog training hiccups, best guns, and favorite quail artists until the bourbon runs dry. And it never does. That isn't to say that Bray's residents are one-dimensional. Many hunt pheasants and ducks too. No one here cares much what you did in your career either. For if you wind up at Bray's, you have, as an African friend of mine is fond of saying, landed your ass in the butter. That is, no one has much time for ego in these parts, though there are many residents who have plenty to crow about thanks to achievements in business, conservation, philanthropy, and the like. One such notable is Walt Boomer. He and his wife Sandy have lived at Bray's going on 13 years. Walt is a tall, affable elder statesman of the plantation who passes for a decade younger than he is, proving the lifestyle is agreeing with him. In a previous life, he was a Marine. Not just any Marine, but what many historians contend is one of the most relevant Marines of a generation. As General Boomer, the 4-star, he led all Marines in Operations Desert Storm and Desert Shield, and prior to that served in Vietnam and has a couple of Silver Stars, Legion of Merit, and Defense Distinguished Service Medal for service that could and should one day fill a book. Not bad for a kid from Duke, but as they would say at Bray's, that's something. But can he hit a quail? I was about to find out as I joined him on one of Bray's immaculately groomed quail fields, the kind that looks as if it was planted to the specs of an Eldridge Hardy painting. A Hollywood Marine joined us as well, Gerald McRaney, the Emmy-winning actor, who for years was known to CBS viewers as Major Dad. McRaney and I got to know each other gallivanting across the globe for a decade, co-hosting the World of Beretta television series. The height of Major Dad's popularity coincided with the build-up to the First Gulf War, and McRaney and his wife, designing women's Delta Burke, made a USO trip to visit the troops under the command, of course, of General Boomer. McRaney and Boomer became fast friends and loosely stayed in touch since but had not seen each other in years. That changed, however, the night before our quail hunt, when we surprised the good general with the reunion. It's also when I discovered how little the general likes surprises. It's not that he didn't welcome the chance to reconnect with McRaney, it's just that when it comes to generals and surprises, evidently it's better to give than receive. Nevertheless, with bird dogs about to be unleashed on a perfect autumn day at Bray's Island, there was nothing but enthusiasm for the moment. A morning of hunting quail provides an elixir that turns grown men and women into kids again. For every covey rise a person experiences is a continuum of the first, a reminder of the genes and emotions that were awakened in that take-your-breath-away inaugural explosion of feathers. The tradition of quail hunting is to watch the dogs work, and then when the birds get up like rockets, it's just a great occasion, says the general with a deliberate and reverent tone that ends with a smile owing to the fact that he knows he's about to live some more of those great occasions, as he so often does, each fall at Bray's. Got a point over here, says Scott Miller, the resident dog training pro at Bray's, who is handling the dogs this morning, snapping the general and McRaney to attention. The duo flank either side of a pointer that's standing as motionless as a statue, head high and its tail perfectly at 12 o'clock. With guns at the ready for the flush, Miller releases a jet black field cocker that attacks the cover ahead of the pointer in an ambush that's designed to rid quail of any notion of sitting tight. This time it's a lone bird that exits stage left, and the general intercepts the plume scud with his first barrel. Nicely done, says McRaney as the cocker finishes his duties by bringing the bird back to hand. I get for what other actors is like opening night jitters each time I walk up behind a point. Therein lies the magic and allure of bobwhite quail hunting. How a 4-ounce bird can electrify a man's nerves, quicken his pulse, and cause him to lose his coordination is one of the medical wonders of the hunting world. A classic case of quail fever with no known cure. And if there were one, who would want it? The next point, the general and I step off the quail buggy and join Miller and his pointer for what may flush. I head to the right side of the dog and the general to the left, both of us nodding to Miller that we're as ready as we'll ever be for the unnerving moment. So he unleashes the cocker again. This time, a staggered pair erupts ahead of me, and just as I am about to take the first of a double, the general poaches the bird in front of me, so I quickly take the second bird before he could take both birds before my nose. Chris, I could say I didn't mean to shoot your bird, but I did, he says with a Cheshire cat grin. Welcome to a Bray's icebreaker. That's all right, the day is young. Paybacks, I say with my own smile, knowing that I now have license to reciprocate. Gentle ribbing comes with the territory, but for quail hunters anywhere, the enjoyment of the experience revolves equally around the performance of the dogs and the strength of the birds. Miller is perhaps the finest dog trainer in America, with the bona fides to back up that statement. He's produced many national champion pointers and is enshrined in the Hall of Fame at the National Bird Dog Museum outside Grand Junction, Tennessee. Much of dog training is about teaching people not to screw up their dogs, and he's gifted at that as well, without making you feel like a toad. As an old trainer once told me, in order to train a dog, you have to be smarter than the dog. No comment. The rest of the morning continues as if scripted, flawless dog work and strong flying birds with few wasted shots. As reunion tours go, it's hard to imagine this one unfolding any better. That is, until we round the bend and find a table set in the field with linen and silver and the plantation chef preparing grilled quail under one of the scores of centuries-old live oaks. Of all the places to land in the food chain, I can't think of a better place than the top. And when that top is at Braze, it's no wonder people only leave when they head to the quail fields in the sky. We can only pray there's a place like Braze there too. Quaking in the aspen. Ruffed grouse or defibrillator. The case for why it's our greatest game bird. A first kiss in a bench-seated pickup, pirated beers around a bonfire in the middle of a secluded gravel pit, and the first time you flush a ruffed grouse. Some things you never forget. I had heard talk of ruffed grouse and read stories about the birds by men named Spiller, Foster, and Evans, and recurring themes emerged. Most grouse hunters tended to shoot nicer guns, had better dogs, and drank older whiskey than I did. None of that, however, explained the obsession with the bird until I flushed one myself. In my early 20s, I was running my setter in a hunting dog field trial on some public ground not far from Aldo Leopold's cabin near Portage, Wisconsin, about an hour north of where I lived in the mostly pheasant country near Madison. It was early April, and these trials were designed to keep bird dogs and their owners from foundering on too many off-season table scraps and a steady diet of cheese and beer. My setter was exceptionally well trained if you commanded it to do what it was already doing. Each heat consisted of 2 hunters and their dogs that were given about 30 minutes to work a 50-acre patch of grass where a half-dozen pheasants were released to test each dog's bird-finding ability. My setter was a free spirit who felt the gun was an overrated element of the bird hunting experience, which is to say he loved to hunt, just not always for me. This was the age before electronic collars, so rather than stay in the designated piece of cover for our allotted half hour, he decided to detour to a stand of aspen on the edge of the planted bird zone. I followed him in, if for no other reason than I didn't want to face the embarrassment of not being able to call him out of that cover. And that's when it happened. My setter stopped with his head slightly down and cocked to his right, looking more like he was trying to listen for something ahead in the stems rather than pointing scent. I bent low to get under the branches, and Duck walked my way toward him, assuming he had found a rogue rooster that had snuck off the field into the trees. Instead, it was as if a piece of the forest detonated in an eruption of tree branches and feathers like some kind of tripwire had just exploded a grenade. The sound was so startling that my setter flattened like a batter ducking an inside fastball, hoping to avoid shrapnel. I did the same. There it was, the bird I had read about, and which was the reason why entire forests were raised so that libraries of books could be published about them. I have faced the charge of a brown bear on Kodiak Island, had a hippo come for me while I was wading the Zambezi, and have stumbled onto elephants in thick cover at 10 steps, but none have startled me any more than that first ruffed grouse flush of adrenaline. It's an underrated cure for constipation. In the defibrillation of a grouse flush lies much of what is endearing about hunting them. I do not skydive, but I suspect stepping on the landmine of a ruffed grouse can't be dissimilar to the biochemical response of leaping from an airplane. This isn't to say that the nerve bundle of a covey of wild quail flushing or the cackling protest of a rising rooster pheasant aren't electric moments, but when a grouse flushes, there is a thundering violence that evokes something more akin to fear than surprise. As Churchill surmised, nothing in life is so exhilarating as to be shot at without result. He could have said as much about a flushing grouse. Since that fateful encounter with Bonassa umbellus, Latin for thunderbird, I have spent a good bit of my existence investigating the game birds that inhabit our planet, including grouse, writing several books and producing TV shows about the pursuit of them. Decades of field research, barstool debates, and studying the scrolls of our elders have brought me to the conclusion that ruffed grouse may indeed be our most uniquely sporty game bird. Before the pheasant, bobwhite quail, and woodcock lobby chimes in about the naivete of my subjectivity, allow me to present my body of evidence. For the record, I love them all, and would add Hungarian partridge, sharptails, merns, and California quail to my roster of favorites. Among our great cast of upland characters, however, there can be only one protagonist. Let's start with the cover our game birds call home. Who among the fraternal order of double-gun toters doesn't look upon the prairie grasslands as a child might a playground? I have spent many seasons following a bird dog through these windswept fields, forever trying to solve the riddle of pheasant scent. Yet I have also found sharptails, prairie chickens, Hungarian partridge, and even quail in similar country. That is, while the birds are each unique and lovely in their own form and movement, several upland species are perfectly willing to shack up with others of their gallinaceous tribe. Not so our woodland grouse, squeezing a living between dense growths of thornapple, prickly ash, alder, and aspen. They're not intimidated by having to fly through green and brown forest canopies, using their hell-bent flush and cloak of the forest in a sleight of hand to vanish before a shot can be unleashed. While billions of dollars have been spent on federal conservation programs to save prairie habitats for pheasants, ducks, and other ground nesters, ruffed grouse, to a great extent, are the byproduct of timber harvest. That is, many print recycling programs aren't worth the paper they're written on. Find a 15-20-year-old stand of aspen that regenerated after being cut for pulp or particle board, and you're likely to find grouse. Thus, if you want to help grouse, be generous with your use of toilet paper and don't spare the diapers. Then there are gun dogs that are adept at finding all manner of upland species. While I have seen many a pointer perform admirably on quail, pheasants, and woodcock, there are few that can handle the spell cast by grouse. In fact, if a dog has demonstrated its skill in finding, say, pheasants, it's likely that it will be disqualified as a grouse dog. The often paranoid behavior of grouse, coupled with their predilection for solitude, make them altogether different than our other great game birds, demanding more from a gun dog. Good grouse dogs tend to be specialists with sensitive noses, the kind of dog that is forever cautious not to crowd a grouse, and that checks in regularly before prospecting too far ahead in the unforgiving thickets of New England and the Midwest. Though ruffed grouse can be found from the North Georgia mountains to Alaska, the spiritual home of grouse hunting resides in New England and the Oahu, in the Great Lakes, where the considerable body of literature and art celebrating the bird originates. You'll also notice that there are no poultry science books about raising ruffed grouse in captivity. They do not surrender to domestication. While pheasants, quail, and partridge acquiesce to life under chicken wire, grouse live by the General Stark motto, live free or die. Thus, the only way to expand their range is to live capture wild birds and relocate them to promising thickets. Depending on where ruffed grouse live, they often undergo seasonal personality changes. Some might say disorders. It's part of their unique charm. Birds of the early season bear little resemblance to those that endure to the late season. Family groups of grouse are sometimes found in the dense cover of the green-leafed early season. Flush one and reload quickly as more might erupt soon. This is the grouse hunting equivalent of finding a vein of gold. They're not covey birds, so they won't evacuate simultaneously like bobwhite quail. However, once one bird hears another flush, they all tend to take it as a cue to leave. Spend a couple of hours hiking through fruitless cover and finally encounter such a flock of birds, and it will hone your reloading skills. Then an event that biologists call dispersal happens as the leaves come down, and the family groups disband in an evolutionary adaptation to strengthen the gene pool and ensure that the species pioneers all suitable habitat. This is the time of year when you might flush a grouse in odd locations, like a small patch of alder next to a highway rest stop when you let your pup out to relieve itself, or from under a bird feeder in the backyard. These are the birds that have seen their world dissolve as the canopy that sheltered them for their existence up to this point disintegrates with each windstorm as the shelter of leaves become forest litter. Now the goshawks, great horned owls, bobcats, and two-legged hunters can all find them more readily. That's when grouse can become especially twitchy, flushing at the first hint of a dog bell or beeper. This is when late-season grouse often move to thicker cover, even evergreens, to socially distance for the winter. In areas where deep snow falls, grouse will burrow into the powder and use it as both insulation and hiding cover. Following a grouse's snow tunnel to flush it is one of the most unique experiences found in the world of wingshooting, for the bird emerges from a talcum cloud in a thunderous, theatrical escape. Unlike the rest of our upland birds, deep snow doesn't present a challenge to grouse survival as much as it does an asset to enduring through the coldest parts of the season. While I grew up shucking a pump gun for ducks and pheasants, a 12-gauge that I bought at a local Kmart after working as a field laborer in the muggy southern Wisconsin summers. The first time I took the 30-inch barreled contraption into the grouse woods, it felt as if I was carrying a ladder through a stand of bamboo. A proper grouse gun is not a universal tool on the order of a Leatherman, but rather must be lightweight and balanced. The kind you can easily carry with one hand so that the other arm can be used to clear ever-present branches. It needs to be a short-barreled point-and-shoot model that can be raised and fired in a split second, about the average amount of time a grouse will present a shot. Indeed, Helen Keller would not be at a disadvantage hunting early-season grouse. A classic gun for roughs will have two barrels and be either 28 or 20 gauge, the latter not being necessary for the close-in work of grouse shooting, but its use, nevertheless, will not raise suspicions among grouse loyalists. While we're on the subject of gear and how grouse hunting cannot be lumped with other forms of upland gunning, a grouse hunter will need a durable pair of brush pants or chaps and a briar-proof jacket to avoid the blood draw common to good grouse cover, preferably one that hints of pipe smoke and wet dogs. Then there is the matter of a drink following a grouse hunt. These aren't the beer-swilling occasions that follow a deer drive. If Scotch is your choice, it best be a single malt, unless you want to risk being confused for a Philistine. In more recent years, bourbon has become an acceptable substitute for Scotch, but not anything on the order of wild turkey. It's considered bad form to mix birds. You can't go wrong with famous grouse, but you may want to try Lagavulin or Lefrog, eliminating the need for a cigar. Lefrog has been described as tasting like a burning hospital. Who doesn't long for that? Lastly is the matter of how birds present on the table. I have consumed many dozens of exotic game birds from across the globe, had pheasant smothered in all manner of sauces and quail wrapped in bacon and stuffed with jalapeno and cream cheese, among many other methods of preparation. But no bird surpasses the succulence of ruffed grouse. They are the Cornish hen of the upland bird world. The fine texture of the meat and moistness of it make it a culinary joy. Add wild rice and cranberries, morels if you can find them, and you're only a wine pairing away from completing a singularly memorable meal. During my sharecropper poor college days at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, I used to supplement my ramen noodles existence with the occasional grouse I managed to scratch out of the sky above the Mead Wildlife Area a few miles outside of town. Whatever game that succumbed was invariably smothered in cream of mushroom soup, that universal donor of meat coatings stocked generously throughout the Midwest. It is the culinary equivalent of drywall. There goes my Campbell's sponsorship. Even under such gastronomic distress, the rich flavor and texture of the bird cannot be denied. I admire pheasants for their cagey escapes, quail and partridge for the subterfuge of a covey rise, sharp-tails for their ever-alertness, and woodcock for the beautiful thickets they call home. I love grouse for all of those reasons, and for the addiction of their one-of-a-kind flush. Experience it once and you'll understand. The greywing of Carnarvon. The windswept bluffs of South Africa's Eastern Cape is home to the continent's most challenging game bird. We sit out of breath and speechless after a long climb. It's as if we're in the front row of a geologic theater. Below the mountainous butte on which we rest stretches seemingly the whole of Africa, as if we can see from one end to the other, from here to eternity. As we look out, it's hard not to wonder what the future might hold for this continent, with its mix of stunning beauty, epic beasts, and cycles of human tragedy. I can only wonder what my 70-something host, Robin Halsey, is thinking as he rests his side-by-side across his lap, lights his pipe, and stares into the abyss below. He has been to these bluffs 1,000 times before, but each time one witnesses the scale of such grandeur, it's impossible not to contemplate the awesomeness of the force that created it. It reminds a person of their cosmic insignificance, but I am nonetheless feeling blessed to be sharing the same time on our planet with both greywing francolin and Robin Halsey. I'm convinced that whatever force conspired to bring us together with double-barreled shotguns and good bird dogs must, in fact, be divine. Halsey's ancestors left England some 150 years ago, during the Depression that followed the Napoleonic Wars, to settle this land that lies in the shadow of Mount Andriesberg, located in the Cape Province of eastern South Africa. His family has been stalking the same greywing francolin for generations, always mindful to leave plenty of birds to seed the future for aspiring wingshots and keen-nosed pointers. Greywings are but one of many francolin varieties that inhabit the country, and there are scores of quail, dove, and guineafowl species to confound gunners here as well. But it is the greywings on Halsey's 20,000-acre Carnarvon estate that have catapulted wingshooting to legendary status on the Cape. If you crossed a chucker with a Hungarian partridge, it's conceivable that the birds might resemble, fly, and even sound a bit like greywing francolin. As the sun sets over the arid mountains and we end our meditation of sorts, we reverse our afternoon's course and return to Halsey's Land Rover, the iron horse that has endured years of rock climbing, and Lord willing will make it down the mountain to Black Eagle Lodge one more time. That's especially important today as Halsey's wife, Berta, is preparing a lavish meal, an event for which not even the greywings take precedence. Joining us are Roddy Watson and Grania Williams, a couple newly arrived from England, where Watson is the proprietor of the famed West London Shooting School. Such schools, I've learned, are the places where you go to perfect your excuses for missing birds. Sitting down to feast after a rigorous day of greywing chasing in the mountains is the fitting punctuation to a near-perfect day of bird shooting. It has been my life's quest to forever increase the frequency of such days. Indeed, it's good work when you can find it. The evening starts as a sort of nightly ritual with a glass or two of a bold Stellenbosch vintage. We then spill into the dining area of the lodge where Berta unveils a succulent leg of lamb, the wafts from which have been priming our taste buds for the better part of an hour. The flavor lives up to its aroma billing, a dining experience remembered both for its succulence and for its spirited fictions about greywings, bird dogs, and guns that never miss. And to hell with those who don't appreciate that, says Halsey with a smile and a toast as we depart the dinner table. Sufficiently stuffed and pleasantly tired, we stoke the fire and melt into the soft chairs that form a semicircle around the blaze. At the base of the fire rests 3 footsore and hunt-weary pointers, Tessa, Cyclops, and Wally, a trio of dogs that know much about greywings and are happy to share their knowledge with visiting hunters. Most pointers I have known have been kennel dogs, released to seek and point birds with almost robotic efficiency. These pointers, however, are members of the extended Halsey family and quickly transform from bird-finding predators to lapdogs once they exchange the hilltops for the sofas of Carnarvon's living room. They seem to understand and appreciate that life as a Halsey dog is holding the golden ticket of pointerdom. While all 3 pointers display an abundance of greywing savvy, I make sure not to stray too far from Tessa, the 12-year-old veteran of the lot. She moves with economy through the sage-like pocken shrubs, never wasting the energy that younger dogs are often wont to do as they prospect hither and yon. Having left an aging setter at home, I decide to adopt Tessa as my personal bird dog for the trip, and she seems accepting if not pleased with the arrangement. She instinctively hangs near me, checking back to make sure I'm following and getting along okay. We log countless miles over the rugged terrain that is reminiscent of parts of Idaho grading to the more gentle terrain of eastern Montana, and she showcases her greywing prowess by pinpointing the skittish birds without crowding them, seldom forcing a wild flush. Unable to keep pace with the younger Cyclops and Wally, Tessa becomes a specialist at finding birds the others miss. It is an endearing quality, and her careful pace suits me. The treeless, arid landscape is a mix of rock and short grass that often reminds me of the steppes of Patagonia, where the planet seems to gasp before it blows fits of wind. It is a place where long shadows claw their way over the land as the sun backlights peaks in the distance. Along the edge of a bluff up ahead, Cyclops rounds a boulder and stiffens with the scent of a lone greywing wafting through his brain. This time there is synergy between Halse's double-trigged BSA and me. I tap the first hammer, sending the bird spinning to earth without the need for a second shot. That is fortuitous, as a double-triggered shotgun in my grip is, well, effectively a single shot, a conservation tool on the order of a duck call in novice hands. It is with a great deal of admiration and a bit of envy that I watch Watson and Halsey work their double triggers without the "where the hell is that second trigger" moment that is the hallmark of my experiences with the British configuration. At the outset of the hunt, it seems a keen idea to indulge myself in South African wingshooting traditions, double triggers and all. But by the end of the experience, I long for one of my single selectives back home, the way one craves a trained dog after hunting with an unruly pup. I have 10 days of big game hunting awaiting me at the end of the bird hunting junket, so my gun case is filled with 2 rifles, but no shotgun, a mistake I vow never to repeat. My longing for a single-triggered double intensifies as we embark on a driven guineafowl shoot. These are helmeted guineafowl, one of 2 species of guineas found in South Africa. Judging from the number of birds that escape my wrath, however, they are also armored. The birds are adept at scrambling on foot to elude predators, which is why they are reluctant to take flight. Halse's solution is simple, however. The gunners form a line across the grass expanse of the gentle fields found on the estate's lowlands. Perhaps a quarter mile away, then professional hunter Kent Olivier leads a crew of drivers in a line toward us. Countless numbers of the avian bombers sail over my gun, as though they are exploiting a weakness in our defense strategy. I intercept but a few of the scores of birds that pass by, for the most part feeling like a prime position in the line was wasted on me because the double triggers made the gun about as lethal in my hands as a clarinet. By the last day of the Greywing Odyssey, however, the BSA grows workable in my grasp, if not comfortable. We begin the morning with a family breakfast that includes the company of 2 of Halsey's 3 daughters, Sarah and Anne's husband, Sean. Hunters here become honorary members of the family, and once you get to know this clan, you'll welcome the adoption. This is a typical breakfast, which is to say it is easy to eat oneself out of hunting condition. We begin with porridge, toast, and fruit, alone, enough calories to sustain us through the day. Home-cured ham, bacon, and eggs follow with fresh squeezed juice from Cape-grown oranges, toast with homemade preserves, and hand-churned butter. I can fast later, I reason, and the hike ahead will account for at least some of the extra calories. Climbing the windswept hills surrounding the farm is rigorous activity, so it's only natural to fuel the engine. When I engage in robust exercise outdoors, my appetite transforms to that of a pre-hibernation bear. There is something of a primordial balance in hunting hard and gorging oneself. It's a simple existence with a clear purpose, to be damn thankful for where we landed in the food chain. It is also such days when it is easy to forget the hectic confusion of work or a demanding office, as if such responsibilities existed in another life. After ruminating over the heaping breakfast, we pause briefly next to the fire before facing the howling winds awaiting outside. The pointers climb over one another like blind pups in search of a spare teat as they attempt to inch closer to the fire. Halsey, meanwhile, leans back, strikes a match, and lights his pipe, puffing the tobacco to life as a plume of smoke hangs over his head, ghost-like, highlighted by the morning sun shining through the panes behind him. Halsey often follows his meals with a smoke. It is a small part of the order and cadence that is so much a part of his existence. A steady intake of smoke and butter would debilitate a lesser man, but the greywing stairmaster that surrounds Carnarvon seems to neutralize the deleterious effects of nicotine, alcohol, and animal fat. There is surviving, and then there is thriving, a distinction not lost on the elder Halse. Hunts are never rushed here, and conversations, if postponed, are always finished. He is forever eager to talk birds and dogs, for they are at the center of the Carnarvon experience, which is to say, his very existence. His passion for the pastime is obvious from his first steps into the rocky hillsides. The wind threatens to blow us back down the hill as we stride for the downwind side, the place, we reckon, that is most likely to harbor the greywing of the area, looking to keep their feathers from blowing off their hides. Shortly after reaching the ridge crest, Cyclops locates a pair of birds below Halsey and Watson. In the wind, I can hear nothing of the exchange between the two hunters, and the shots fired in the gusts at departing birds could have been a mile away if the sound were any indication, instead of merely 70 yards to the west. Watson tumbles the two birds despite the tailwind that blows them quickly downrange like leaves in a gale, providing a strong testimonial for his shooting school. By the time we return home from the afternoon hunt, Berta's kitchen permeates the house with the aroma of roast guineafowl, potatoes, carrots, and freshly made apple pie and ice cream. Life cannot be considered complete until you've sampled a dish of Berta's homemade ice cream with a spoonful of chocolate syrup drizzled zebra-like over it. It tends more toward addictive than merely delicious. After dinner, we return to the study in its massive fireplace, where the pointers are already waiting, sprawled like lumpy snakes. We muse over another port whose grapes were crushed about the time JFK took office. It is all part of the potion that awaits the wingshooter at Carnarvon. Travel here once and you will find a way to return, in spirit if not in person. Just be sure to bring your favorite shotgun. Search for a Mayan relic. In the shadows of ancient pyramids and amid the dense forests of Mexico's southern Yucatan lives a mysterious and ancient jungle fowl. We only think we call turkeys. Truth is, they call us. And my beckoning to the southern tip of Mexico started inauspiciously while walking the aisles of the Safari Club International Convention some 25 years earlier, when I happened by what appeared to be a Photoshop manifestation, a mount of what I thought to be some kind of peacock-turkey hybrid. With its powder blue head with yellow and orange spots, electric blue-green body, and spotted tail fan, it looks something like a turkey, a slightly psychedelic version anyway. Instead, it was my introduction to the ocellated turkey, unquestionably the most stunning, outrageous, and utterly captivating game bird in the world. I studied the bird the way a scientist might the discovery of a species believed to be long extinct. If this is real, I thought, I must find a way to answer the innate calling to want to hunt it. A few years after that chance encounter with that taxidermy mount of an ocellated turkey, I landed in the city of Campeche at the tip of the Yucatan. This place won't be confused for the resorts and tourist trappings of Cancun or Cozumel, and that suits me just fine. Instead, I was bound for a primitive camp that consisted of little more than picnic tables and hammocks under the thick weave of the forest canopy. It would be my home for a week of hunting for ocellated turkeys in the dense Yucatan jungle, or so I thought. Shortly after I arrived, however, a series of lightning-induced wildfires had suddenly engulfed our hunting area and sent us scrambling for vehicles in the middle of the night to evacuate. Within weeks, much of the Yucatan was reduced to ash. Haze from these unprecedented blazes reached as far as the Gulf Coast of the U.S. Plans for my long-anticipated hunt for ocellated turkeys, well, went up in smoke. After the inferno-shortened attempt to find an ocellated turkey nearly a quarter century ago, the chance to return to the land of the Mayans was a calling, yearning really, that needed to be answered. This time I arrive at the peak of the breeding season, and no fires are to be found anywhere, so optimism abounds. Joining me is Spaniard Francisco Berguez, a friend and fellow resident of Bray's Island, the sporting community located in the picturesque low country of South Carolina. Francisco is one of those blessed souls who manages to find an open hunting season somewhere nearly year-round, and the Yucatan is next up on his global journey. While returning to the jungles of the Yucatan is déjà vu, fires or no fires, the birds are still reclusive and the jungle itself remains the greatest obstacle for the hunter. This is not a forest of giant hardwoods whose sprawling treetops and vines darken the jungle floor, keeping it mostly free of ground vegetation. Instead, this canopy is relatively low, and as such, plenty of light reaches the forest's earth, stimulating thick undergrowth. It's not uncommon, for instance, to be within shooting range of a bird for many minutes with no practical shot owing to the impenetrable vegetation. This same dense cover is used by the area's abundance of jaguars and puma to ambush peccary and agouti, a large rodent weighing upwards of 12 pounds. The first hunt starts in the afternoon as I sit with my shoulder-height Mayan guide along the edge of a harvested field of maize cleared in the midst of the jungle. With perhaps 45 minutes of shooting light left, a lone gobbler emerges into the field about 500 yards to our left, walking and scratching like any other turkey with no more concern other than to fill its crop before heading to the roost for the night. At the sight of the tom, my guide becomes animated and exhausts much of his English in one sudden burst. Big turkey, big turkey. Then in a few seconds, he turns up the volume on an electronic call with speakers hidden in the bush just outside our blind. With a slight time delay owing to the distance of the bird, the ocellated lifts his head and stretches his neck to look for the ventriloquist who is punking him. We capture his attention. Then the bird starts sprinting toward us with the slightly awkward waddle left over from their velociraptor descendants. After about 100 yards, however, he stops as if he forgot why he was running in the first place, no doubt suddenly drawn to a bug that crossed his path. We call again, the bird sprints another 100 yards or so and is suddenly distracted yet again, possessing the attention span of a teenager. He's now substantially closer, however, so my guide continues calling while the bird takes its time ambling toward us while occasionally pecking the ground. It's getting late, but the tom is inside of 80 yards and looking hard to see the bird that's challenging him. When hunting ocellated turkeys, it's the male call that is used, a threat to other males, rather than a female call designed to seduce a receptive gobbler. Thus, there's a point at which the tom wants to size up his opponent and make a calculation, such as a turkey might, as to who is going to do the ass-kicking in this encounter. "Where's your decoy?" I ask, doing my best Pictionary routine to bridge the lack of my Spanish and his English. The bird stops at about 70 yards, craning his neck high and then to the left and right, as if to suggest that he knows he should be able to see the bird making all the racket at this distance. With no decoy, however, the gobbler turns and walks away suspicious of the encounter, proving that even an acorn-sized brain is big enough to know better. The birds, not my guides. As I return to camp, I ask our outfitter, Arturo Malo, if he has a turkey decoy. "I don't," he says, "but we can make one." Using an old ocellated skin left over from a hunter who took 2 birds but decided to only ship 1 home, some styrofoam and a little wire, we fashion the crudest of decoys. Given the thick cover and the fact that these birds have never seen any kind of decoy before, we are bullish that just having something that sort of resembles a turkey should suffice. What do we have to lose in trying, I reason? "The Walking Dead," says my guide with a grin, as he assesses our Frankenstein creation, stretching his English and knowledge of pop culture farther than I imagine a Mayan might. While I don't have any luck coaxing a bird to our decoy the next morning, I return to camp to find Burgaz admiring a beautiful tom with exceptional spurs that he took just a couple of hours earlier. The enormous spurs look like the blades cockfighters put on their roosters to make them extra lethal. Despite the thick cover surrounding his setup, Burgaz was able to find a narrow window in which to take his first ever ocellated. To see one up close is nothing short of mesmerizing, and what seems like an impossible task to extract a bird out of these thick environs suddenly becomes plausible to me. If hunting teaches you anything, it's that you must be an optimist. "They're incredible birds, eh?" he says as we admire the kaleidoscope colors of the stunning jungle fowl. "What a bird indeed. Congratulations," I say, caught in the spell these stunning birds cast. The next morning, we strike off to a new stretch of forest, my guide stopping in the dark after a 30-minute drive from camp before walking me to a nondescript piece of jungle. After rigging a makeshift blind consisting of sticks and camo netting, he positions our homemade decoy in a small opening in the forest. Just as first light breaks through the leafy canopy, my guide turns the crank on the electronic caller, and within 30 seconds, a bird answers. He's close. It seems inconceivable that in the vastness of this forest that we could stop, set up shop, and be within 100 yards of a gobbler. Is this bird tethered, I wonder? Is this blind luck or Mayan intuition? I don't dwell on the answer, but instead focus on our sudden good fortune and getting set quickly with shotgun resting on my knee, facing the general direction from where we heard the answering bird. Judging by the sound of the gobble, the bird is so close that we have to be still, for he could be within eyeshot of us at any moment. That is the hope, anyway. Just as sun rays hit the forest floor, the approaching tom struts his way in, weaving through the thick forest like some kind of apparition in the early morning light. As it shuffles toward the decoy, it emits the subtle, captivatingly liquid-sounding call that is something like a gobble, but not quite. He stops perhaps 20 yards from the decoy behind heavy cover, clearly tenuous about approaching any closer. The wait is interminable, for the bird doesn't move an inch for what seems like 15 minutes. He continues to call, however, stretching his head tall as he does. Then a laser of sun rays breaks through the forest canopy and hits the leaf litter just ahead of the bird. The tom steps into the beam as if hitting his mark on stage as a spotlight cues his performance. He gobbles once more, and as soon as he stops, I introduce him to a load of Winchester No. 4s, sending the jungle bird to earth without so much as a flap. Persistence and patience pay dividends in an ocellated hunt. Any hunt for that matter, so does a decoy, apparently, no matter how makeshift. While ocellated turkey hunting bears some resemblance to turkey hunting elsewhere, it is also completely different in many respects, not the least of which is the stunning bird itself. Some call its Elton John wardrobe gaudy, still others refer to it as garish. Whatever the description given to this magnificent jungle fowl, there's no denying its brilliant, captivating plumage. While they lack the beard shared by the rest of the Meleagris clan, they make up for it with their outlandishly long spurs. When you finally get the bird of your hunting dreams, especially one that has haunted you for more than 2 decades, there is both a sense of elation and relief. I knew going in that this return quest would deliver fortune and glory or become another Mayan ruin. Hoist one of these ancient relics in your hand, and you will know a richness of experience that only the jungles of the Yucatan can deliver. An Okavango oasis. When it comes to hunting in the Garden of Eden, expect both good and evil. Depending on how one looks at a frontier town, Maun, Botswana has either come a long way or gone too far. For the old guard professional hunters, the character of this outpost on the edge of the Great Okavango Delta has been forever lost. Dirt roads have been paved, saloons have become cafes, and many people now hunt with cameras instead of rifles or shotguns. To a first-time visiting Bwana, however, the village still feels a part of old Africa, a time when few people made it to the Dark Continent, but many dreamed of one day walking amid the riches of her game fields. I carry that dream with me as I meet Mike Gunn at the slick of asphalt that passes for the Maun airstrip. Gunn is a professional hunter who, like so many whites, left Rhodesia after the bloody war that preceded that country's transformation to Zimbabwe. Gunn's rugged 6-foot, 2-inch frame, auburn beard, and sun-dried skin give him the look of a leftover from some failed desert military campaign. We load my gear into a Land Rover for the 3-hour drive to Chitabe 1, a camp situated in the vast Okavango Delta, one of the wildest and most game-rich ecosystems on the planet. The Okavango River winds through Angola and then Namibia before it forms the Okavango Panhandle in northern Botswana. From there, it spills into the desert to form an expansive floodplain, its waters eventually dying of thirst before ever meandering to a sea. It is a reservoir of life in an otherwise parched landscape. A complex food chain thrives within the delta, creating an Eden unlike any other this side of the Old Testament. Elephants abound in the delta as we cross their spoor, perhaps an hour before actually spying our first pachyderms of the journey. It's one thing to see elephants in zoos or on a game ranch somewhere in South Africa, but this is different. No fence. Nothing but the largest animals to roam the world, wandering about their native habitat like prehistoric relics. After traveling 8,000 miles, I am witnessing the Africa of my imagination, wild, free, and altogether intoxicating. Each bend in the trail brings more life. We are greeted by the vanilla and mocha of a herd of zebra, then several wildebeest with their idiotic head nods stagger across the trail in front of us, delaying our journey. A half hour later, we spy giraffes pursing acacia leaves with their camel-like lips, careful to extract the chlorophyll without the wrath of the thorns. By late afternoon, we reach Chita Bay, a canvas community seemingly on the edge of reality. The camp is covered by sausage trees, with their squash-sized fruit dangling ominously overhead, waiting for gravity to turn them into widowmakers. Just beyond the tent stretches a lengthy lagoon where a pair of ornate pygmy geese swim between the pond lilies. Past them, a buffalo, probably an outcast bull with a massive boss, grazes lazily like a guardian at the gates of the Delta's riches. The region is resplendent with life. Everywhere there are animals or signs of them, like some kind of theme park, but instead it is a wild utopia, unlike any other. Mark Kiriachu, who owns and operates this safari business in the Okavango, greets me as we reach camp. He's a small-frame man of Greek descent with Einstein eyebrows who has grown up in the African bush. He's a link to old Africa and the big game safari tradition, popularized by Roosevelt and Robert Rourke. Noted professional hunter P.H., the late Harry Selby, was made famous by Rourke's writings in the African opus, Horn of the Hunter. Kiriachu worked for Selby, the man many still regard as the dean of the Fraternal Order of Big Bore Toters. There's barely time before dinner to unpack and grab a sundowner before parking ourselves around the campfire, that most welcoming of safari habitats where souls become interconnected through shared adventures by day and stories by night. I've stared into the flames of many African campfires, and conversations seem inevitably to flow from memorable hunts to great safari riders to the future of Africa and her wildlife. The same sober tone eventually permeates the discussion, an emotion evoked from the sense that the Africa that first seduced us is vanishing piecemeal like a treasure stolen with every blink. There is the feeling of urgency that one must go to Africa now, for it may be gone tomorrow or will at least soon be altered beyond recognition. Though still small in human numbers, Botswana's greatest immediate concern is its growing population. Since the 1970s, the country has more than doubled in size. The concept of marketing wildlife tourism tomorrow has little meaning to a man driven to feed his family today. The upshot is that wildlife and the habitat they need to survive is being sacrificed to feed the ever-expanding human population across the whole of Africa. This trend cannot continue indefinitely if there is to be hope for the continent's great beasts. Confident that the Africa we love won't disappear overnight, however, we amble to the dining tent to celebrate our first night on safari. The faint woo-oh-oh-oops of hyenas are heard over the chatter of multiple conversations, the clinking of forks and plates, and the rumbling of stomachs beginning to ruminate. Servants in white gowns tend to the moment's concerns, more wine and additional helpings. It's a far cry from the pup tent and MREs of a mountain camp. But after having roughed it plenty of times in my hunting career, I am fine with this African version of hunt glamping. An apple tart dessert and a final glass of port sends me to that agreeable state that is halfway between consciousness and slumber. The rover splashes axle deep in a channel of the Delta that looks almost stream-like as we leave camp for a drive-about in search of francolin, a wild African chicken of sorts. The pheasant-like bird is on the menu of almost every predatory creature in these parts, so they are fast and as dodgy as a mongoose. There are three predominant varieties of the ground-dwelling birds in the region: the red-billed, crested, and Swainson's. The red-billed is a shifty customer about the size of a chukar that seems to forget that it has wings, for it is only out of sheer desperation that they take to wing. The Hungarian partridge-sized crested francolin is the bird you hear squawking ceaselessly each morning. They are the banty roosters of the bushveld that disturb more sleep than a weak bladder. Shooting them, then, brings a special satisfaction. The Swainson's is a hen pheasant-sized gamer that is especially delicious over rice and smothered in white gravy. They seem to know that, however, and run like jackrabbits. Bird dogs are difficult to keep in the region owing to leopards that regularly patrol camp at night and confuse pets for easy prey. Then there are the snakes that tend to evade slow-moving humans, but not fast-running bird dogs. A pointer will unwittingly dash into a snake's strike zone before the serpent has a chance to move away. Puff adders are especially slow-moving snakes, but possess quick strikes, and their hemorrhagic bite rapidly turns flesh to liquid. Then there are black mambas, rarely seen by humans, but not so for fast-moving dogs that cover far more ground. Dog encounters with the gray snakes with their black mouths, how they derive their name, are more common, and the chances of a dog getting a lethal kiss from a mamba is much higher. Any way you slice it, dogs are a high-risk investment in this part of Africa. Thus, a team of beaters with flushing sticks and whips, along with rattles made of soda cans with rocks in them, are the tools of choice for a delta bird shoot. The flat plain of the Okavango is punctuated by the occasional copse of palm and thick scrub, the kind of island of habitat that provides the francolin an ideal escape from the intensity of the midday sun. These same stands of cover also provide ideal roosting places for fish eagles, the white-headed birds resembling a slightly smaller version of a bald eagle. It is from these pockets of cover that the birds must be driven. To do so, Gunn instructs the staff of 5 beaters to encircle one of the patches of bush and drive it toward the 2 of us as we wait at the opposite end. I hold a 12-gauge over and under with Italian loads of 7.5 shot. Gunn grips a bolt-action .458 with 500 grain solids, insurance against any surprise flushes of the 4-legged variety. The Delta is home to all of the big 5, elephant, rhino, lion, leopard, and buffalo, so a boomstick helps affirm our position atop the food chain. Shouts and claps grow ever louder as the line of beaters draws closer to us, midway through the cover. Ahead of their approach, I can see the scurrying forms of francolin as they dart back and forth on the edge of the thicket, trying to sort out what is causing all the racket and how they can best evade the intruders. The first bird to take flight sails 30 yards to my right, climbing steadily until it absorbs the punch of my shot. 3 more birds follow the same course, twofold, a half dozen more launch as my gun is broken and I'm fumbling for shells, feeling like I'm searching for exact change in a billfold. I recover in time to intercept the last of the flock. The beaters take pride in the successful ambush, knowing that a surplus of game meat will mean protein in their otherwise starchy diets. We reload the rover, people with guns and machetes hanging off the side like a Banana Republic hit squad. We stop at another island of cover and repeat the strategy, though we choose to tackle a larger thicket this time. Gunn and I again take our position at the end of the cover, waiting to reap the harvest delivered by the beaters. Soon after the drive begins, however, the shouting of the staff turns to screams. Gunn steps forward, pulling his .458 off his shoulder. At the same moment, a cow and calf elephant emerge from the bush, the matriarch's trunk in the air like a periscope as she quarters toward our end of the thicket, trumpeting her anger at the intrusion. "Come quickly," shouts Gunn, as we dash at a right angle from the beasts. Storming elephants move as unpredictably as plains twisters, so Gunn is eager to give the pachyderms a wide berth. I'm suddenly feeling decidedly undergunned, armed with only the bird loads, and I'm not certain who'd win a foot race between Gunn and me. The elephants thunder past, swallowed surprisingly quickly by the surrounding bush. What amazes the first-time visitor to elephant country is just how well such an enormous beast can cloak itself in the shadows. The francolin hunt suddenly becomes anticlimactic, upstaged by the drama and adrenaline induced by the 6-ton beasts as we wonder how many more might be in our path. Botswana elephants are the largest of their kind in the world, a third again bigger than those found in East Africa. A plume of smoke billows on the horizon as Gunn peers through his binoculars. There is a strangeness about this smoke, however, as it lingers long and ghost-like in the air. Gunn and I climb aboard the rover to investigate from the elevated perch. As we reach a quarter-mile away, it becomes clear that this isn't smoke at all, but rather is a cloud of dust blown to the sky by a herd of some 1,500 stampeding Cape buffalo. It's a massive game unlike any I've ever seen, even surpassing the great caribou migrations that I've witnessed on the Canadian Arctic. Trailing the herd is a pride of 7 lions, working the buffalo like sheepdogs their flock. 3 enormous bulls stay to the rear of the herd, turning to face the oncoming lions without fear. "They look at you as though you owe them money," Rourke famously wrote of buff. Lion and buffalo have been doing this dance for millennia, but to witness it firsthand is a window into the natural wonder of the Okavango. We watch for more than an hour as the lion's advances are thwarted by the buffalo that seem to view the cats as little more than irritations in their otherwise sublimely bovine existence. It is the picture of the Africa I've forever dreamed, one that will remain in my memory, perhaps long after it has disappeared from the landscape. I am especially thankful to be a bird hunter this day, for if I weren't, I would have never had the excuse to come to the Okavango and witness the theater only this land can offer. And once you taste the fruits of this garden, a return journey is too tempting to pass. Wings and a prairie. When the North American duck and goose migration commences, there's no place like Saskatchewan to put you in a fowl mood. For waterfowlers, the search for the endless season is about living the birds, starting as many mornings a year as possible with decoying ducks and geese above and a retriever next to you. No matter the month, somewhere in the world, there are ducks and geese to pursue, whether this hemisphere or the other. For the Camo Coalition who wear necklaces of duck and goose calls and cradle auto-loading shotguns, the months of September and October cannot be spent in a better location than Saskatchewan, the province that hosts the greatest concentrations of ducks and geese in the world. And yes, that includes Argentina. For Charlie Potter, the former head of Delta Waterfowl and current chief of the Max McGraw Wildlife Foundation, and Steve Ferris, a retired rock guitarist turned waterfowl property raconteur, a trip to Saskatchewan come autumn is part of the natural order of North American waterfowling. Like most activities in life, hunting is so often about who you enjoy the experience with, and the more your companions share your passion for pursuit, the closer the bond of the brotherhood. When it comes to waterfowl, the firm of Dorsey, Potter, and Ferris is about to be incorporated in a Saskatchewan goose blind. We're veterans of the Canadian prairies, but this is our first foray together to investigate the region and its fowling. North American duck and goose hunters look upon the prairies the way a baseball player might the hallowed diamond of Yankee Stadium or a bourbon lover the state of Kentucky. Western Saskatchewan sits in the heart of a continental funnel that is a superhighway for ducks and geese, originating in the famed Yukon-Kuskokwim, YK Delta of Alaska and the Yukon. It's one of the largest deltas in the world, nearly 51,000 square miles, and more vast than even the Mississippi Delta. These birds leave the far north and descend on the grain fields of the Canadian prairies before later disembarking to their wintering grounds in the southern U.S. and Mexico. In addition to transient ducks and geese, the prairies produce the lion's share of the continental duck populations. So for a period of time, each autumn there is a perfect storm of locally grown birds combined with the migratory flocks. It's the motherlode of continental ducks and geese and provides waterfowling with spectacle and theater unlike anywhere in the world. With nearly a quarter of the world's wetlands found across Canada, waterfowl here sometimes appear in tornadoes of wings that descend on grain fields in a helix of birds numbering in the tens of thousands. Sitting in a pop-up or layout blind in the eye of such a storm is one of the great wonders of the avian world. It is to waterfowl what the great wildebeest or caribou migrations are to the planet's big game. You too can feel like a giant crocodile awaiting the plunge of thousands of wildebeest passing before its nose. On the wide open prairies, the anticipation builds for minutes as you see birds move en masse toward you, their calls faint at first, but then building into a deafening cacophony. Soon bird shit is dropping on you like green hail as thousands of ducks and geese hover above. Sometimes the flocks are so overwhelming and the sound is so deafening that the initial shotgun blasts don't even register with the greater flock, for they just keep coming as the birds at lower elevation begin to succumb to the work of the autoloaders. As unfathomable masses of birds approach, even the most seasoned prairie gunners can be gobsmacked, tempted to shoot before the main concentration of birds has reached the closest possible range. Then there is the mental calculation about how to maximize the sudden windfall of opportunity. Veterans take the longer birds first and move their way in to closer birds, because by the time they get to them, they will have flared to the outskirts of effective shooting range. Rookies make the mistake of taking the close birds first, working their way out, which often means a third shot is likely to be on the fringe, if possible at all. It isn't just the sheer numbers of birds found in western Saskatchewan that makes it a magnet for waterfowlers. It is the diversity of the flock. The region draws a mix of Canada geese, the Arctic nesting small-sized cacklers ranging to the much larger prairie subspecies, white-fronted, snow, and Ross's geese. Then there is a mix of mallards, pintails, widgeon, and other ducks that originate here. Set up well before dawn, and it will be the ducks that normally arrive first, followed by the geese, as if part of some innate air traffic control scheduling. We've come to Saskatchewan to hunt with Mike Franklin's Pacific Wings Prairie Outfitters, a family of Washington state waterfowl experts who have started their season on the Saskatchewan prairies each September for more than a decade. Franklin's grandson, Grayson Bistideau, is Franklin's 20-something protege, who is fluent in goose and has the enthusiasm for the game of a Labrador pup. Hunting with a guide who never tires of the pursuit, despite day after day of waking up in the dark and driving 45 minutes to set up 500 decoys, makes each bleary morning fraught with anticipation. Part of that is owing to the fact that with such passion comes an expertise in scouting birds and always knowing where they'll be at first light. For Ferris, a recovering rocker, not in the usual 12-step rehab way, his autumns are spent guiding as well, so he recognizes and appreciates Bistideau's enthusiasm from the start. Anyone who is alert and functioning at 5 a.m. must be a duck or goose guide, for they're already 2 hours into their workday. Shortly after sunrise, perhaps 1,000, maybe more, snow geese beeline for our spread of hundreds of full-body decoys, some of which have a lifelike motion, owing to motors connected to car batteries hidden throughout the spread. To watch Franklin's team position a decoy spread and blind is like watching roadies set up a concert venue in time-lapse. It's as if they're a goose hunting pit crew continually looking to shave time. There is a point at which it's clear every damn goose in the sky is headed for our decoys. In that delicious moment of anticipation is contained much of the magic of waterfowling in Prairie Canada. Sometimes it seems as if the birds are approaching too high and may be forced to make a pass before banking around for their final approach. Then, in one of the most captivating moments in all of hunting, the entire flock begins to contort, sometimes turning upside down to lose altitude quickly as they whiffle and plunge to the decoys. It's as if they're suddenly skydiving rather than decoying, winged versions of Greg Louganis. Each of us is coiled like a spring, just waiting for Bistideau to call the shot so that we can unleash a coordinated barrage to defend our position against the onslaught of geese. As he does, there are few wasted shots, for bird after bird plunges from the sky until our guns are empty and the flock has retreated to regroup and find a friendlier field. The prairie potholes are one of the planet's most unique ecosystems, a landscape scooped and carved by glaciers of the Pleistocene 10,000 years ago. When they melted after the last ice age, a mosaic of small wetlands, ponds, and lakes was left behind, a perfect prescription for more than 200 species of birds that rely on the region to breed and nest. This little-known 275,000 square mile ecosystem is as important to North America as the Amazon is to South America or the Serengeti to Africa. For billions of birds, it is vital. The combination of an international demand for grain and the development of modern farm equipment that is capable of draining and plowing through potholes, however, is a recipe for ecological disaster. As we sit and enjoy a memorable morning in Saskatchewan, around us are the faint outlines of potholes past, shallow depressions that were drained and drafted into crop production. The destruction of the prairie potholes isn't happening wholesale, but rather metastasizes in incremental fashion like a cancer on the land. The cumulative effect, however, is unmistakable to the prairies and to the production of birds. While water is key to the area's bird productivity, so is the surrounding upland cover. The grassy habitat is even easier to convert to crop production, and without it, the birds have no place to nest. What is left throughout much of the prairies is remnant nesting cover, places so small that an influx of predators to the area, fox, raccoons, skunks, and the like, have little trouble sifting through the grass to find bird nests. With our arrival in September, however, we focus on finding the right crop fields where ducks and geese want to feed. The rolling stubble fields of wheat, barley, and peas to a migrating duck or goose act as a narcotic, for no birds can resist such an abundance of tempting food. This is why Saskatchewan is the perfect antidote for short attention span waterfowlers, for there is seldom enough time to finish a cup of coffee before more birds arrive. As the next wave of snow geese wing their way toward us, undulating over the rolling terrain, there is suddenly a strange sound emanating from inside our blind. Barely audible under the din of so many snow geese overhead, Ferris and I each pan to the middle of the blind to witness Potter performing his a cappella snow goose routine. It is as if he is channeling the snow geese, mimicking both sound and motion in an uncanny and uproarious fashion. It is, in a word, mesmerizing, so much so that Ferris and I lose focus on the birds and begin belly laughing at his ventriloquist act. The comedy ends, however, when a mix of thousands of snows and white fronts reach the decoys, a raucous chorus of calls and wings that is just another indelible moment in the life of a Saskatchewan waterfowl hunt. The euphoria of another close encounter with a massive flock is seasoned with plenty of laughter from Potter's performance, but perhaps his is the secret call that convinced the flock to nearly land in our blind. Such are the moments that live forever in a hunter's memory. The next day is our last for this trip to Saskatchewan, and while the geese have been cooperative, we have yet to connect with any of the enormous swarms of ducks that are holding in the area, some potholes nearly black from so many ducks choking their waters. Determined to end the mallard curse, we drive to a hill of recently harvested peas. As we step out of the pickups and look at the ground, it's as if we're standing in the midst of a chicken coop, for the ground is covered with duck feathers and recycled peas. There are still plenty of peas scattered on the ground, however, so despite the heavy feeding that clearly took place here, we are bullish that the birds will return to clean the field before moving on. With a generous spread set, we sit and wait for the ducks to get hungry. More than an hour goes by without seeing a duck. We start looking at our watches, thinking our decoy invitations might go unanswered. The thought of picking up so many decoys, deployed seemingly for no reason, starts groaning through my mind. Then, in the distance, what looks like a plume of dark smoke appears in the faint light of dusk. Suddenly, everything changes. Thousands of ducks lift off a nearby wetland and are heading to the pea field where they fed in the morning, the same pea field in which we are sitting. Wave upon wave of thousands of mallards begin flying figure eights over the field, eventually settling on our decoys. Against the smoldering sunset, the dark forms of tens of thousands of ducks is a scene that only exists on the Canadian prairies. In 15 minutes, we go from little hope to 3 limits of birds. It is confirmation that for 2 months a year, the quest for the endless waterfowl season must start with an appointment in Saskatchewan. Everything else can wait. Endless wings. Ducks in all directions as far as the eye can reach. Welcome to a Delta dawn and an Argentine shooter's awakening. With the night cityscape of Buenos Aires etched in neon in our rearview mirror, my 2 drivers and I begin the 3-hour journey to Patria Chica, a half-century-old estancia located in the sprawling plains of northern Argentina. I crane my neck against the window of the Suburban to search for a glimpse of the Southern Cross, but it's nowhere to be found. Instead, I find a comfortable rest and settle in for the long ride through the Argentine darkness and a few more winks. I awake to a bouncing slow crawl as we enter a driveway that hasn't been graded in a while, perhaps ever, to see the lodge that I just traveled halfway around the world to find. It's a welcoming dwelling with whitewashed walls and hardwood trim, situated along a great drainage system created by the Parana and Uruguay rivers, as they meander their way inexorably to the Atlantic Ocean. This massive expanse of marsh and lowland stretches for some 150 miles before emptying into the Rio de la Plata, a short-lived but voluminous river that quickly surrenders its silt-laden waters to the Atlantic. Arriving at the estancia after midnight, no light could be seen for miles, save for a few stars that showed through the patchwork of clouds overhead. We've traveled beyond the reach of rural electrification, which, in the developing world, is seldom far from the major metropolitan centers. After a 10-hour flight and 3-hour drive, sleep is foremost on my agenda as wake-up comes at 4:30 a.m., in the form of a firm rap on my bedroom door. About the time I finally get to sleep. A propane generator, the only source of electrical power to the estancia, begins humming, and soon incandescence temporarily blinds me until I rub the sleep from my eyes. I dress with a base layer of what I'll be wearing under waders this morning and stride into a small dining area down the hall from my bedroom. The other 5 U.S. shooters, whom I do not know, are already at the table looking well rested and sipping coffee for they arrived yesterday afternoon in plenty of time to settle in and get a good night's rest. I greet them through my travel-induced haze and try to appear human, even though I feel like my ghost is shaking hands with each member of the group. We eat breakfast or lunch or dinner, depending on the time zone from which you originate, before departing in the darkness for our hunting areas near Rio Gualeguay, a river whose confluence with the Rio de la Plata forms one of the region's many rich waterfowl zones. I have so far traversed some 200 miles of Argentina's outback without seeing anything other than the shoulders of roads illuminated by headlights whose rays were quickly swallowed by the abyss of the Argentinian night. The delay heightens my anticipation of dawn, for sunrise now has the buildup of an unveiling of a great work of art. Above in the first faint light, outlines of ducks fly past. The peculiar three-note tisri, tisri, tisrio whistles of tree ducks and the wee-o chatter of rosy-billed poachers confirm that the silhouettes aren't mere illusions, and that this is a long way from my home waterfowling turf, where mallards would be quacking and wood ducks shrieking. I'm joined by Richard Mellish, one of the early Americans to confirm the rumors of Argentina's remarkable waterfowling. He's a veteran of many Argentinian forays and proves a valuable source of information for my baptism to the area. With dawn breaking behind us, we can see a distant storm in front, far across the table-flat horizon, lightning bolts hitting ground, but too distant for any thunder to reverberate all the way to us. The combination of early morning sun against the bruised clouds is starkly captivating and provides a slightly alien backdrop to random flights of ducks that crisscross overhead as if headed to all points on the horizon. The birds appear as shadowy figures at this point, some looking like pintails and redheads, while others have the silhouette form of widgeon and teal. Their abundance, however, confirms the reports of vast riches of wildfowl below the equator. The variety of species found in the area is as impressive as the sheer numbers of the birds. The staple of the gunning is provided by the rosy-billed pochard, a coal-black, stoutly built duck whose most distinctive feature, as its name suggests, is a red bill with a fleshy hump at its base. Like its North American pochard cousins, canvasbacks and redheads, the rosy bill is a fast-flying target that takes the majority of a load to subdue. Like most ducks and geese found in South America, the rosy bill migrates to the vast marshlands of northern Argentina and southern Brazil during the winter. Although a handsome bird, to those who have tasted its succulent meat, it is perhaps at its most beautiful when grilled medium rare, as it's nearly indistinguishable from beef fillet. As luck would have it, finding a robust Malbec to pair with the duck is a simple matter in Argentina. 3 species of tree ducks are also common here: the stunningly ornate white-faced, the fulvous, and the black-bellied. All 3 species commonly congregate together, but the white-faced tree duck is unique in that it is found from sub-Saharan Africa to Costa Rica and south all the way to Argentina. Silver teal, a duck larger than any of the North American teal, is also abundant and is as challenging to hit as its brethren the world over. The brown pintail, though not common here, is present and resembles our northern pintail with a coating of mocha. There are others too, and a morning in an Argentinian duck blind gives one ample opportunity to learn to identify them on the wing by the color, wing beat, silhouette, and sound of their calls. Mellish is my impromptu coach for the hunt, whispering the names of the birds as they approach our 4 dozen or so rosy-bill decoys, plastic blocks shaped like mallards, but painted black and red to match the king duck in these parts. There is no need for haste when shooting here, for a waterfowler is hard-pressed to find such concentrations of ducks anywhere else on the planet, save perhaps Prairie Canada. It's the best duck hunting in the world, says Mellish, in case I hadn't heard the reports. As the morning progresses, with Mellish and me taking turns shooting at incoming flights, our host, Pablo Pereira, wanders over to inquire about our success. He's a Uruguayan cattle rancher and part-time polo player who, along with his wife, Pilar, enjoys introducing foreign hunters to Argentina's wealth of wildfowl. As we share our hits and misses, an enormous chaja, or southern screamer, sails low over our blind, casting a foreboding shadow. The chaja is a prehistoric-looking bird with an eagle-like head and hulking body that struggles to take flight, but, once airborne, glides to its next marshland location before gravity eventually wins. If a turkey and a swan crossed, it might look something like a southern screamer. Farther down the shallow marsh, Californians Bob Nichols and Leland Shue are introducing 12-gauge loads to a flight of incoming silver teal. Across the wetland, hidden in a blind fashioned of reeds, Sam and Sue Campbell, a Tennessee couple, are alternating shots at passing flocks of fulvous and black-bellied tree ducks. What does strike you when you first visit the Argentinian countryside is that seemingly every acre of land is grazed. Cattle stand knee-deep in the browse cover of the marsh we are in, watching us shoot ducks like some kind of bovine gallery. Grain and livestock, especially beef, are the country's major exports. Despite the abundance of cattle production, Argentinians also consume more beef per capita than any other nation on Earth. The vastness of the wetlands have, to this point, been able to withstand the relatively primitive agricultural practices employed over much of the northern lowlands. Frequent shooters here, like Mellish, haven't seen a decline in the number of ducks either, at least not yet. The great expanse of wetlands in the Gran Chaco region of northern Argentina, an area northwest of Entre Rios, the province in which we are hunting, also helps sustain the nation's astounding duck populations. The region is marked by countless small marshes, making one wonder if there isn't more water than land in the vicinity. The nation's mixture of grain fields and marshlands accounts for its ability to produce staggering numbers of ducks. Moreover, hunting pressure in the country is virtually non-existent, save for a relatively small number of foreign waterfowlers whose travels take them to these fabled hunting grounds. Guns and ammunition are both difficult to access and expensive for Argentinians whose modest incomes are mostly saved for essentials. With an abundance of inexpensive beef, locals would ask, who needs duck on the menu? While pumps and double guns sometimes find their way into Argentinian duck blinds, the softer recoiling autoloaders are most commonly used for both duck and dove hunting here. Since you won't readily find gunsmiths in the middle of Argentina, veteran shooters often bring 2 guns and spare parts, owing to the high volume of shooting done on dove and duck shoots. Recoil pads are another wise investment before arriving in Argentina, for most foreign sports have never experienced the retina-detaching, ear-ringing, high-volume shooting the likes of which are the hallmark of gunning here. For the 1,000 round per day dove shooting crowd, you haven't been to Cordoba, the center of the dove shooting universe, until you need to ice your hematomas. The next morning, we find ourselves standing thigh-deep in water, surrounded by a makeshift blind consisting of a rectangle of thin tree branches temporarily stuck into the clay bottom of the marsh. As light illuminates the grayness of the low fog that cloaks the marsh, flights of ducks, ranging from 10 to 30 in a flock, stream toward our decoys. The waves of descending flocks can be seen one behind the other as far as the eye is able to penetrate the murk. The first in are the silver teal, strafing the blocks from cattail height, here and gone before the guns can greet them. Soon, a great concentration of rosy-billed pochards, whistling ducks, and Brazilian teal are massing overhead, all in what seems an effort to reach our decoys. In that moment, it's clear why so many wing-shooting addicts become seasonal residents of Argentina in June and July, the peak of autumn in the southern hemisphere. To be sure, the shooting is nothing if not addictive. Now, more than 25 years later, I continue to return to Argentina, where ducks still darken the sky like the birds in dreams, or Hitchcock nightmares, just as they did the first time I arrived. Is it the greatest waterfowling in the world? Come to Argentina and answer that question for yourself. Chances are I'll be here when you do. Virgin birds. Being the first to greet the migration brings special rewards in Alberta, and I have seldom contemplated living outside of America. As my father, a Bataan Death March survivor, was fond of telling us as kids growing up, you won the lottery the day that you were born an American. If there were one place that could perhaps tempt a move, however, it might be Alberta. I started traveling to the province in my 20s, first for big game and fly fishing, then for birds, and now for ever more memories. Since my baptism 30 years ago, I've made dozens of trips to the province to coincide with the arrival of swarms of ducks and geese that wing their way through Alberta on their ancient migratory journeys beginning in September. Whether Prairie Canada or anywhere else that you may be contemplating a hunting trip, there are always one or two outfitters who have taken the game just a bit farther, evolved to be a bit more advanced than all others. Is it because they have a better area, more skilled guides, broader territory to hunt in case plan A of a hunt strategy doesn't pan out, better equipment and more decoys? The answer, of course, is an emphatic yes to all of those questions. The great ones, whether athletes, coaches, or outfitters, work harder and plan better than the rest. After so many autumn visits to Canada, it's clear that when it comes to Alberta waterfowling, good money is on Rob Reynolds' Ranchland Outfitters as the team to beat in a well-qualified field. You might not take Reynolds for a student of Seneca, the great Roman intellectual, but he lives by the philosopher's timeless mantra, often attributed to that other divine force, Vince Lombardi, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. My inaugural hunt with Reynolds begins with a tip the evening before, when a local farmer phones Reynolds that he has a problem with thousands of geese landing in his standing pea field, devouring his crop. Every outfitter should establish a tip hotline. Damn the bad luck, I think to myself with a smile. Having an outfitter who is integrated into the area farm community is confirmation that we chose the right team for my umpteenth trip to the province. While I've hunted in pea fields across Prairie Canada countless times, I've never done so in a standing pea field. As we deploy silhouette decoys amid the foot-tall peas, I begin to wonder if we're in the right spot, until I see, in the light of my headlamp, the carpet of feathers and goose droppings that litter the ground under the pea vines. Clearly, these birds have been feeding in this field for a while, and it is time that we did our civic duty and rid the farmer of his plague. I'm from America, after all, and I'm just here to help. We spend an hour setting decoys and positioning layout blinds in the dark. Then dawn breaks eerily quiet. Where are the birds, we all think to ourselves after about 20 minutes of silence, afraid to say anything for fear it might jinx the morning. I rest in my blind thinking that we set our alarms really early and did a lot of work in setting decoys to have missed the morning flight. The prospect of such is nearly unthinkable. Though such an experience wouldn't be the first time for me on the Canadian prairies, did the farmer pull a prank on Reynolds? Did we get the wrong GPS coordinates? Had the birds already moved on from this avian cafeteria? Are these Wednesday feeders and it's only Tuesday? As epic as the waterfowling can be here, these are still wild birds and sometimes they simply don't follow the script, despite our best efforts at persuasion with generous decoy spreads and lifelike call renditions. Perhaps the birds fed at night with the full moon, or a coyote or other hunters spooked them out of the field the evening before, after the farmer had called in with the report of a field full of birds. Who knows? All of this flits through my thoughts as it seems obvious that if the birds were going to come this morning, they would have arrived by now. This is about the time an outfitter's ulcers start acting up, for to have clients travel all the way to his Canadian backyard not to see birds is like giving your guests the wrong date to a party. Or as the famous guide refrain goes, you should have been here yesterday. Since the birds are nowhere to be seen, I decide to shut my eyes in the comfort of the layout blind and have a nap. If there are no birds to shoot, I might as well get something out of the morning, I think to myself, and a little shut-eye would be welcome about now. In the blind next to me is my older brother Joe, and I'm pretty sure that I can already hear some snoring coming from his mattress. Blind. About the time I begin dreaming of geese, I awaken to faint goose calls far in the distance, slightly blurring the line between consciousness and a dream state. In seconds, Reynolds and his team of guides begin calling, begging the long-range birds to come to us with seductive double clucks. Apparently, the birds merely slept in, but at last, hunger coaxes them to return for a breakfast of peas. We can see them nearly a mile away, flying against the yellow light of the morning, looking like the backdrop of a Redland painting. There is no question where they are headed, for they take a direct approach to our decoys, flying no more than treetop high. As I soak up the anticipation, it reminds me why I love waterfowling here so much. There is none of the sky-high flying of birds to the south, the paranoid behavior common after they've seen countless decoy spreads and have been shot at all along their migratory route. These are mostly virgins to the waterfowling game, and we are ready to introduce them to the law firm of Winchester, Winchester, and Winchester. As perhaps 1,000 geese reach our decoys at various elevations, and in a mixture of separate family groups, The challenge becomes calling the shot to maximize opportunities for gunners up and down the line that is some 30 yards wide. Such are the dilemmas of guiding in Alberta. Reynolds scans the airspace above his central position in the line and does a rough calculation of available birds within easy shotgun range and calls the shot. Soon the autoloaders are barking and the big Canadas are falling, some of the massive birds rolling decoys as they hit as if catapulted. Before we can finish picking up nearly a dozen birds from the first wave, a flock of perhaps 500 mallards and pintails swings over the decoys, approaching from behind us as they arrive from a different roost than the one holding the geese. We lean back quickly and freeze, for the mallards are low but flying fast, passing over for a closer look, but not yet ready to commit to the decoys in front of us. We give them one more pass and they bank hard and turn toward us, barely flapping their primaries, as they glide to land in front of us this time. Their descent, however, is interrupted by Reynolds' "Take 'em." "The skies are alive up here," he says after we unleash a barrage, autoloaders spitting out shell hulls like a cartridge assembly line. Everywhere we look there are birds, a mix of Canadas, white fronts, and a few snows. And oh yes, ducks, predominantly mallards and pintails. Only a few minutes ago we were wondering if the morning venture was going to be all for naught, and now we are picking up the last of a limit of both ducks and geese. Canadian limits are generous, so the bird cleaners will be busy much of the afternoon, a position that comes with plenty of job security in these parts. The second morning we head to a harvested pea field that is tabletop flat, so Reynolds opts to erect an A-frame blind looking like a tuft of cover you might see along a fence line or around a pothole. While it appears a bit like a dryland muskrat hut to me, it consists of local vegetation, and the color palette and shape is reminiscent of what the birds are used to seeing in the area, so Reynolds is confident that it won't alarm approaching birds. Did I say these birds are virgins to the hunting game? An early lone goose approaches and Reynolds calls for Joe to take it. 5 other gunners and 2 cameramen focus on the single bird as Joe now has an audience. For better or worse, I begin to calculate how much I'll charge him to edit out the scene if he misses. Hush money is an often overlooked revenue stream in outdoor TV. Nevertheless, Joe handles the heat and folds the goose in a crushing hit from the blind side, Winchester's cleverly named waterfowl load. It wouldn't be his only impressive shot of the day, for the graying waterfowler put on a bit of a clinic, shooting the way I used to remember him performing when I was a young kid, with no small modicum of hero worship for the big brother who introduced me to the ways of the Camo Coalition. It is good to see that he's still got it, even at his advanced age, I think, as I flash back to some hunts of our youth. Of all the waterfowling he's done across our continent, however, he has yet to connect with a white-fronted goose. That all changes, however, as a lone bird approaches our blind just minutes after we discuss this missing species in Joe's waterfowling life list. Like the single Canada, Joe drops the specklebelly with one clean shot, a beautiful mature bird with the characteristic dark splashes across the whole of its breast. It is an old bird with the colorful plumage to prove it, and they don't come dressed any more smartly. After the successful morning, we take a break for some walleye fishing on the nearby North Saskatchewan River, an 800-mile flowage that winds its way through Alberta into Saskatchewan. After a short jet boat trip downriver, we begin catching 18 to 24-inch walleye on every other cast, a fishing experience on a par with the area's unrivaled waterfowling. What walleye lack in fight they make up for in flavor, their scientific name being Sander vitreus, which is Latin for pass the tartar sauce. They are synonymous with shore lunch across the North Country of Canada, for they are to a skillet what a tenderloin is to a grill. And if ever a species was meant for the plate, it's the walleye. While we welcome the fishing diversion, in other parts of prairie Canada, the upland bird hunting can be extraordinary with a mix of sharptails and Hungarian partridge found in brushy coulees, along field hedgerows, and in the overgrown yards of abandoned farmsteads. Limiting out after a morning of waterfowling isn't a rare occurrence here, so having something to do, in addition to a nap, is a bonus we are happy to embrace. The last morning, as if Reynolds trades in unique blind configurations and has some kind of Hollywood prop locker filled with all manner of hides, we head out to the field with a trailer blind. Tow it to the field, park it where you want to shoot, and bingo. Instant blind without any setup time or hassle. Clearly, Reynolds has had a lot of time to contemplate how to disguise hunters on the Canadian prairies. The winters are long and cold up here, so conjuring better, more efficient ways to fool ducks and geese is something of a pastime. That and ice fishing, where tip-up is a universal term referring to a method of catching either walleye or bottle bass. Unlike the geese earlier in the trip, the Canadas this morning are out early, heading to our blind in the faint light made even more muted thanks to a cloud layer that moved in overnight. At first, it's small groups of 3 and 4 that start the morning, and then maybe 15 minutes later, hundreds of the birds are clamoring on approach toward us in a sort of Hitchcockian moment. Suddenly it becomes thousands of both ducks and geese as hushed conversation in the blind turns to the frenetic. Ducks out front, watch these geese. See 'em to the left. Wait, right here. No, 6 from the right. Got 'em? Take 'em now. Look down the line inside the blind as a few thousand birds are massing above, and it's as if we're bobbleheads craning back and forth in an effort to sort our focus in the din of the congregation of birds overhead, calls blowing and guides overruling one another as to when to call the shot. Xanax, anyone? Watching clouds of ducks and geese barreling toward you at low altitude is something akin to winged Viagra to the ardent waterfowler, like Bo Derek running on the beach in slow motion. That sight, the birds, not Bo, is the memory lock that you take with you when you leave Canada. It's the electricity from such unforgettable moments that become the hallmark of duck and goose hunting here. Experience the classic Canadian tornado of birds swirling above, a helix of wings stretching 1,000 feet into the sky, and you will know what it's like to be at the end of a rainbow, sitting on a pot of waterfowling gold. Welcome to Alberta and to duck and goose hunting as good as the old-timers once described. Tequila Sunrise. A waterfowling postcard from south of the border. What seems like an endless stream of pintails wafts like feathered smoke high over my blind, the trill of their whistles barely audible over the drone of so many wingbeats, headed to an as yet unknown location. The small ring of mangrove stems stuck in the mud around me serves as both my blind and a door into some of North America's greatest duck concentrations. The funnel of the continent's Pacific Flyway leads to the rich coastal estuaries of America's southern neighbor, and waterfowlers who venture to Mexico's west coast and the fabled land of the Yaqui Indians will stand a strong chance of experiencing some of the planet's best wing shooting. In addition to the phenomenal numbers of ducks that winter here, there is an impressive array of different species as well. Pacific black brant, pintails, gadwall, widgeon, blue-winged, green-winged, and cinnamon teal, fulvous and black-bellied whistling ducks, redheads, greater scaup, shovelers, mottled or Mexican ducks, canvasbacks, and many others. The same estuaries that serve as winter havens for ducks also host pelicans, herons, oyster catchers, spoonbills, terns, gulls, and myriad diminutive shorebirds that all travel here to feed on the rich salsa of fish, aquatic invertebrates, and insects that thrive in the brackish waters. Bring binoculars and you can work on your life list of birds while alternating with your shotgun as you channel your inner John James Audubon to take some ducks for closer inspection. Because the season extends into winter here too, the birds are often dressed in their brilliant courtship plumage, making this stretch of Old Mexico a collector's favorite. Partners Ruben del Castillo and Miguel Puig are 2 English-speaking Mexicans who make it their business to help gringos sample the best of Mexico's wing shooting. Their Wing Shooters Lodge has long been a favorite destination for dove and duck hunters. For wing shooters looking for the varied gunning of a combination duck and dove adventure without having to make the long voyage to South America, the mixed bag opportunities found in Sonora's Yaqui Valley is a comparable alternative. My first taste of the Sonoran experience came while sharing a blind one afternoon with Del Castillo on Tabari Bay, an inlet off the Gulf of California. Though excellent waterfowl numbers are still found in the vicinity, there were considerably more birds in the Yaqui Valley in the 1950s, when rice was the major crop of the region. Since that time, the Alvaro Obregón Dam was built, and its construction, along with an extensive series of new irrigation canals, diverted water across nearly the entire valley. Since the limited water supply is now spread throughout a vast region, there are no longer ample reserves to sustain the flooding needed for the rice farms that once used much of the available water in the valley. Instead, crops such as wheat and safflower now dominate the area that has come to be known simply as Mexico's breadbasket. Today, the ducks loaf by day in the estuaries lining the 62,000 square mile Gulf of California, a pool of water formerly known as the Sea of Cortez. This inlet begins below Mexicali and stretches some 700 miles south to Mazatlan. At twilight, the ducks leave the waters unmasked to feed on the surrounding grain fields, much to the chagrin of area farmers. Such food supplies in close proximity to resting waters allow the birds to fatten before their return journeys north to the breeding grounds of the Dakotas and Western Canada. It's not uncommon to start the day with a dove shoot and end it with a duck hunt, depending on optimal tide conditions for waterfowl hunting. A break for steak fajitas, grilled duck, chicken enchiladas, and other regional entrees is sandwiched between the hunts with plenty of time for that most celebrated of Mexican pastimes, the siesta. This afternoon, surrounding our blind are some 20 pintail decoys, listing slightly in the waves born of winds off the Gulf. A flock of perhaps 40 widgeon fight the breeze as they fly toward our decoys, their determination to reach the spread evident by the directness of their course of approach. The gusts force them to fly at crop duster altitude, buzzing the mangrove tops as they detour briefly over land to reach us. We take a pair of drakes from the flock, expending an equal number of shots. Duck hunting in Mexico affords the shooter the opportunity to be selective. With nearly continual flocks streaming past our blind, there is no concern that the flight might dissipate any time soon. We are careful to pick drakes from the flocks, which isn't difficult with fully plumed birds flying in the bright afternoon light. A long line of Pacific black brant soon decoy behind the widgeon, their primaries knifing through the air currents as they coast like feathered kites to the decoys. I intercept a pair while Del Castillo does the same. The birds are moving into the bay as the outgoing tide exposes the area's mudflats, enticing resting and feeding locations for the brant. Pacific brant are tidewater geese that nest in the high Arctic along the west coast of Canada and Alaska. A small percentage of the 150,000 brant found in the Pacific Flyway also nest on Russia's Wrangel Island. Baja California and the northwest coast of Mexico, some 3,000 miles from the brant nesting grounds, represent the two primary regions for hunting Pacific brant. Del Castillo and I greet flights of the birds with intermittent shots as I continue my introduction to this intriguing sea goose. These diminutive geese, with their dusky plumage, are uniquely linked to the ebb and flow of the ocean, feeding at low tide on the beds of exposed eelgrass. During the incoming tide, the birds congregate in large rafts in the midst of bays, often out of reach of hunters. Low tide, then, is the period when waterfowlers enjoy their best chances of encountering brant within shotgun range. One brant that folds to my shot was banded some 4 years earlier, 22 miles southeast of lonely Alaska. It's lonely no more. Another brant taken by a different member of the group proves nearly 20 years old, according to banding data. This Methuselah of birds probably logged as many as 120,000 miles in its lifetime of migrations. As the old-timers would say, that's one's best left for stew. In addition to brant, we take a few widgeon and pintails that make up the preponderance of the other species winging past our blind. We watch flock upon flock of widgeon sail over our blocks and land nearby until some 2,000 birds float outside of shotgun range beyond the perimeter of our decoys, looking like a feathered moat. We decide to diversify our take and wait for a redhead, canvasback, or perhaps a cinnamon teal to cross our path. The hiatus in the activity isn't long as a lone drake cinnamon teal shoots like a flare across the sky before splashing among the flock of widgeon outside our decoy spread, its russet plumage looking like a sparkling ruby against a bed of gravel. I watch intently for 20 minutes as the ducks swim about, oblivious to our blind or my intentions. Finally, in an act of fate unprecedented in my waterfowling career, the massive flock rises in unison, flying over our blind, giving me the opportunity to surgically pluck the lone cinnamon teal from the cloud of widgeon. I quickly retrieve the bird and examine its stunning red and blue plumage with the admiration of someone who seldom sees this beautiful duck of the West. The first time you hold a cinnamon teal, you wonder who painted it, for it's the one bird that challenges the wood duck's lock on the title of most striking waterfowl on our continent. Along with the other waterfowl common to this expanse of Mexico, I've forever had a fascination for hunting the unique tree ducks, or pichiguelas, that inhabit the region. Both the fulvous and black-bellied varieties can be found in the marshes near Obregon, a prosperous city of 400,000 inhabitants that lies some 20 miles inland from Tabari Bay. Though hunters will encounter a few of these birds near the coastal estuaries, the tree ducks are more regularly seen on the freshwater marshes farther inland. We drive some 25 miles east of Obregon on the last morning of my foray to Mexico. At the end of our drive is a series of small cattail sloughs, preferred habitat for the tree ducks. As we approach the first marsh, at least 500 pichiguelas, both fulvous and black-bellied, spook from the water and begin circling the marsh, creating a chorus of their characteristic whistling noises that reminds you of an unruly tennis crowd. In flight, the long legs of these ducks dangle awkwardly behind them, giving the birds a strange, almost shorebird appearance. As I calculate my lead, I account for the illusion that they appear larger than they actually are, and focus on the birds' bills to draw my leads. Soon they begin plummeting to earth. It's much the same as the illusion pheasants present as targets, which is why they often get their tails shot off by newbies who neglect to focus on the beak. The dramatic sights and sounds of thousands of hissing pichiguelas lifting off that small marsh will live in my mind's eye until I return to make ever more memories. The sheer awe of such concentrations of birds continues to make Old Mexico a waterfowler's dream. And there's room in the blind. Wish you were here. Crying fowl. Once upon a wing-shooting time in Argentina. Waterfowlers subsist on a diet of memories and anticipation. That truth comes to mind as I stand knee-deep in water and enthusiasm. I spin back and forth, capturing glimpses in the pre-dawn darkness of ducks in small flocks as they negotiate the air currents over the decoys in front of me. The constant trill of pintail whistles across the marsh sound like crickets perched atop my shoulder. A strange cacophony of sounds precedes the rapture of dawn, as if an orchestra consisting of makeshift instruments is tuning up for a performance. The stage is Western Argentina, and the curtain call of the marsh is moments away. With stars in the eastern sky washed by the first light of the morning, perhaps 2,000 ducks lift off and begin flying the perimeter of the 100-acre rush-collared wetland. Hundreds of birds discover the decoys and plummet toward them, stopping short of committing to set their wings. In minutes, it becomes impossible to track all the inbound birds, some dive-bombing the decoys, while others scream past. My first shots are laughably behind their targets, but the reports send a stunning aggregation of ducks and other birds into the air, the sight resembling the mushroom plume of a nuclear detonation on the horizon. It's as if every winged creature in the vicinity has suddenly gone airborne. Just then, I'm wondering if I brought enough cartridges. In the mayhem of the cluttered skies, I spy a flock of rosy-billed pochards with the same silhouette form of canvasbacks, beelining for the decoys. I lead the first bird, and at the slap of the trigger, the third bird in line falls. "Nice shot!" hollers guide Alexander Antonin over the din of thousands of squawking, quacking, and whistling birds. I nod and smile in appreciation. There will be enough misses ahead. No need to make myself look any worse than necessary, I reason. Then my radar locks on 20 or so white-faced, whistling ducks as they hiss their consternation at having to vacate their once quiet confines, passing over the decoys within easy range. In 3 shots, 4 birds drop. Tree ducks are the fainting goats of the avian world, for a shot anywhere near the bird seems to induce cardiac arrest, dropping them like stones out of the firmament. The rest of the flock heads for any of countless small marshes and ponds in this sprawling flat plain of western Argentina. Save for the occasional copse of eucalyptus and wandering gaucho, the region's open landscape could easily pass for parts of the Dakotas. Before the whistlers dissolve in the distance, a dozen Chiloe widgeon decided to inspect my decoys more closely, setting their wings like their North American counterparts, duped by a seductive spread of mallard blocks. I splash a brace, doing the waiter waltz through the water to recover the downed birds so that I might examine them more closely. Their size and conformation are similar to those of the American widgeon, but their plumage is predominantly white with an iridescent purple mask that stands in dramatic contrast to the rest of the ivory and russet feathers. A handful of other species, most of which I've only seen on the color plates of bird books, make up our invited guests. In my mind's eye, I assign North American duck species to the silhouettes I'm seeing, an attempt to help me remember the identities of the Argentinian ducks, like some sort of picture association game. Despite the differences in birds and the miles from my home waters, a dawn punctuated by ducks forever reminds a waterfowler of the magic contained in a marsh at daybreak, no matter the continent or time zone. Argentina is to waterfowling what South Dakota is to pheasant hunting, what the Madison and Yellowstone are to fly fishing, and what the Rocky Mountains mean to elk hunting. It's the fowler's El Dorado and Shangri-La rolled into one. Unfathomable numbers of birds, quality outfitters, generous limits, historic estancias, and accessible transportation, if not great roads, combine to make Argentina the land upon which many American and European wingshooters annually fix their gaze. Case in point, the Duncan family from Mississippi, Jim and Joyce and their son Tom have joined our party. They're repeat visitors, having parlayed their success in the timber business to family outings in the land of the Pampas and the Gaucho. Stuart Williams, a writer who crosses oceans as frequently as others cross the street, is making his 31st trip to this hallowed wing-shooting destination with us. Boris Popoff and his wife Takana have also exchanged the cool spring of Minnesota for the comparatively warm winter of Argentina. We divide our hunts into morning and evening affairs, leaving by 6 a.m. to reach our gunning sloughs by 6:30. Some venues come replete with sunken blinds, while others are meant for waders. The hunting is equally memorable in either case, for some waters produce a mix of teal and Brazilian ducks, while others are favored by rosy bills and widgeon. There is a ridiculous abundance of birds, which makes you feel like you're the first fowler to set foot in this virgin marsh. This is why gun and ammo companies make regular forays to Argentina to test their wares. If there is a better proving ground in the world than Argentina for shotguns and cartridges, you'd be hard-pressed to find it, and Lord knows few autoloaders or shoulders could withstand more. Independence Day. The 4th of July isn't thought of as a red-letter day on the waterfowler's calendar. For 4 gringos, however, it is a date that will forever remain indelibly etched in our goose hunting memories. Our brush with history starts with a 45-minute drive from San Jose, an estancia located near the town of Colonel Suarez in western Argentina. With a waning moon and little more than light from stars illuminating the sky, a team of 5 bird boys dig individual pit blinds in the midst of a picked cornfield. Following that, they position a couple hundred windsocks and silhouette decoys like a mote of party balloons around the blinds. A hint of sunrise reaches the eastern horizon, and with it comes our initial visitors, a skein of 30 Magellan geese. The males are larger than snow geese, but like their North American counterparts, are predominantly white. The females, conversely, wear a beautiful combination of chocolate, black, and white-barred plumage. Taxonomically, there are no true geese in the southern hemisphere, save for introduced Canadas in New Zealand and Australia. The Magellan geese are actually shelled geese, one of 8 species found in South America and Africa. As they approach, we crouch low in our single pits, emerging like heavily armed trap door spiders as the birds reach the decoys. Given that the birds are close and that this crew of gunners knows their way around shotguns, more than a dozen geese fall in the first volley alone. Another dozen flocks visit us, lined up one after another like jetliners on final approach. The smell of gunpowder turned to smoke permeates the air as the click and snap of the double guns we're employing this morning, breaking and closing, becomes Morse code of sorts, signaling a shoot for the ages. The concentration of birds is reminiscent of the peak of the North American waterfowl migration on the plains each spring and autumn. It is the kind of abundance that staggers the imagination and has decoyed hunters back to Argentina for decades. Sadly, however, that has all changed. During the peak of European fur demand in the 1970s, the Patagonian fox, a primary predator of Magellan geese, was heavily trapped throughout the goose's breeding range. The result was an epic explosion of goose numbers, which accounted for unprecedented goose hunting throughout central and southern Argentina. As fur demand waned, however, fox numbers once again increased, along with their predation on the geese. Today, the country has closed hunting for Magellan geese, ending one of the world's most memorable waterfowling experiences, at least until the Europeans once again develop a fashion for fur. And a few cold winters across the continent just might make that happen. The bird wrangler. For South African Trevor Commons, perfection is a safari on the fly. The beast is dead, but that's when it becomes dangerous. 40 yards in the sky, the 18-pound spur-winged goose plummets toward my blind like a feathered meteorite. When calculating the lead on the bird, I neglect to consider what might happen if my shot is indeed successful. The headlines fly through my mind: Kamikaze Goose KO's Nimrod or Bird Brains Hunter. The thought of leaping into the water to miss the projectile flits through my thoughts in the slow motion of the moment until I remember the crocodile that patrolled past my hide only a few minutes earlier. During my indecision, the bird smacks the earth behind me with a bone-crushing thud. Of the world's sporting birds, the spurwing comes the closest to being dangerous game, especially during uncontrolled descent. Spurwing are seemingly a throwback to the Mesozoic, a bird one might imagine as the successor to the pterodactyl. The most distinguishing feature of the spurwing is its sheer size. It is the largest goose on the planet. With a wingspan more than 6 feet, the spurwing appears to lumber swan-like into the sky, and once airborne, it's about as maneuverable as the spruce goose. I share a blind with Mississippian Bob Cook, and farther down the bank of the river sit Richard and Marcy Welker, a Michigan couple enjoying their first African wing-shooting safari. Our blind stands some 20 miles from the Indian Ocean, along a river channel lined with open dirt banks framed by towering canes. We are in South Africa's KwaZulu-Natal region, a bird-rich area once known simply as Zululand, a name that rolls easily off the tongue. The open banks along the watercourse are preferred rest areas for spurwings, and Commons arranges a few dozen homemade silhouette spurwing decoys, plywood cutouts, along with several Canada goose shells he's imported from America. The silhouettes are enormous, all of 5 feet long and 4 feet high, and a goose could undoubtedly see them from as far away as Kilimanjaro. There's a biological term called supernormal stimuli, which explains why a bird is attracted to outsized objects. That is, why you can put a blind in the shape of a giant decoy in the middle of a spread. And not only will it not flare approaching geese, they'll be ever more drawn to it. Which perhaps explains why some men find breast implants the size of watermelons attractive. Biologists studying the phenomenon have put artificial tern eggs 3 times the size of real eggs in nests only to witness the terns as they attempt to incubate the artificial giants at the expense of the actual eggs that they wind up pushing out of the nest. "Mark right!" shouts Cummins from the cover behind us. A flock of white-faced, whistling ducks approaches, announcing their presence with their distinctive 3-note whistle. This handsome, long-necked duck is found in both South America and Africa, inhabiting tropical lowlands across the eastern half of the Dark Continent. The long form of the birds in flight, almost wading bird-like, and their peculiar white faces make them easy to identify. Welker plucks one of the birds from the flock before they flare to other waters. Yellow-billed ducks, looking and sounding like hen mallards with bright yellow bills, and red-billed teal share the skies with the geese and whistling ducks, diversifying our bag. Bird boys use rowboats to fetch the fallen ducks and geese, for the waters teem with crocs that have developed a taste for labs and almost anything else that enters their river. Cummins' retrieving crew is slow to reach one of the fallen spurwings that is flopping on the water, so the race is on between the small fetch boat and 3 other crocs triangulating toward what amounts to an outsized topwater lure. Hungry crocs make certain that no bird goes to waste. It isn't clear what you have to have done wrong to be drafted for retrieving duty here, but it is likely a profession that doesn't come with a pension. The crocs aren't alone in the river, however, as the bulbous faces of hippos periodically surface, spraying water and groaning as they rise. At first glance, they are seemingly sublime plant eaters whose doughboy appearance belies their malevolent nature. They might be the most dangerous animal in Africa, says Commons with a watchful eye and a tone of mistrust in his voice, which is saying something when you think of the considerable cast of African beasts whose menus have included Homo sapiens. "Mark right," shouts Commons, ending our brief conversation the moment he spies a pair of Egyptian geese sailing toward us. The region's other geese, the Egyptian variety, are roughly the dimensions of a small to medium-sized honker and readily decoy to the Canada dupes that have been painted the rusty brown to match this African species. The pair passes wide of Welker's blind, but swing back overhead. It is an easy double. It should have been an easy double. I still can't believe that I didn't bust a feather. A wing and a prayer. Tyndall Lodge. Running out of cash and desperate to carve out a life together, Trevor and Colette Cummins struggled to find a way to extract a living from the South African landscape. Only after exhausting conventional employment, the couple came upon the idea of opening a bird hunting operation. The notion was received with laughter and no small amount of skepticism from the country's big game outfitters. Some 40 years later, however, thanks to the success of the Commons wingshooting safaris, many of South Africa's big game outfitters are dovetailing bird hunting with their commercial big game ventures. The stone walls and floors of Commons Tyndall Lodge, Zulu for partridge, and the many mounts of African game birds that adorn the great receiving room are instantly welcoming to wingshooters who follow the rumors of memorable bird hunting emanating from South Africa. Hardwood tables and bookshelves replete with scores of sporting titles add to the atmosphere. A small sign behind the bar sets the tone of the experience. Relax, you're on safari. Underfoot are zebra rugs from beasts that won't ever have to worry about lions again. And in the corner sits a piano in case any guest is moved to music by the confidence of bourbon or wine, or both. Tyndall was built in 1948 by former Italian prisoners of war who remained in South Africa after World War II. It's located near the predominantly Afrikaans community of Vryheid in South Africa's Natal Province, a region blessed with abundant wingshooting opportunities. Our introduction to the area's waterfowling comes early the first morning of the sojourn. We arrive at our blinds before dawn. They are sturdy hides with wooden frames and cane sides, complete with cushioned seats. They're situated at the confluence of a small stream that feeds into a 120-acre reservoir, the point of entry for every duck moving upriver looking to rest on the lake. As Cummins will tell it, though, it takes years of experience to get it right, and his education came through trial and error and first-hand exposure to international wingshooters. It's got to be right, he says, or they just won't come back. It's that approach to his business that has brought him a steady cadre of repeat clients, the best testimonial for any hunting outfitter. It is the nation's abundance of birds, coupled with Commons' careful stewardship of that resource, to offer consistently abundant shooting that has allowed him to grow his list of far-flung guests. His Tyndall Lodge sits in the Montana-like countryside of eastern South Africa, an area once dominated by the kingdom of Shaka Zulu, the greatest warrior the Zulu nation has ever known. It's an area where both upland birds, predominantly Swainson's and Shelley's francolin, and waterfowl, yellow-billed ducks, red-billed teal, and Egyptian geese are found. The marquee attractions, however, are guineafowl and spurwing geese, black and white birds that resemble a hybrid of a Muscovy duck and black swan, with a bit of pterodactyl mixed in. While the guineas are driven, the spurwing decoy, like the rest of South Africa's waterfowl, providing a mixed assortment of ducks and geese on several of Commons' many hunting venues. With homemade spurwing silhouettes staked along the edge of a 5-acre slough, I await dawn with the expectation that the monstrous birds will be coming soon. As is often the case when hunting with Commons, the birds arrive as if on cue. For such ponderous birds, they utter a remarkably subtle hiss, enough to set the hair on the nape of any waterfowler's neck on end with anticipation. A dozen birds glide through the gray light of a cloud-covered morning, their wingtips tapping the air currents ever so slightly. In the slow motion of the shooting sequence, I swing the gun ahead of the lead bird and merely send the flock into aerial contortions in that awkward moment when the birds first discern that something is dreadfully wrong with their descent. The second barrel betrays me as well, a remarkable phenomenon given the amount of airspace above my blind occupied by birds. It wouldn't have been so humiliating save for the fact that there are witnesses to the travesty, witnesses with long memories. As fortune has it, there are soon opportunities for redemption as myriad small flocks of whistling ducks, red-billed teal, Egyptian geese, and more spurwings arrive from a nearby reservoir. Several catch the ire of my 12-bore, later to become the staple of an equally memorable dinner at Tyndall. Common's daughter Camilla is a chef de partie, which is to say she is something of an alchemist, transforming the treasures of the field into riches on the table. The variety of game bird species in South Africa is perhaps unmatched anywhere in the world. In addition to many kinds of waterfowl, some 12 species of francolin, upland birds ranging in size from partridges to pheasants. And many species of doves, pigeons, and quail are also found here. The key to maintaining quality waterfowling, says Commons, is to provide plenty of rest areas for the ducks, and you mustn't overshoot your birds. It's an axiom that holds true everywhere commercial hunting is offered. He hunts an area some 500,000 acres in size, developing cooperative arrangements with farmers who sell him shooting rights. When the landowners see financial value in the game, he says, they begin to manage the land to accommodate more wildlife. Such is the truth the world over. Wildlife that pays, stays. An eruption of guineas. Driving guineafowl, says Commons, is like to trying to lasso smoke. Although there is no shortage of the birds on the plains of southern Africa, they seem more akin to roadrunners than game birds. In a 100-yard dash between a guinea and a pheasant, good money is on the guinea, and don't worry about spotting the rooster 30 yards. After 2 frustrating attempts to corral flocks of hundreds of guineas, Commons refuses to concede to the beasts. Having developed something of a love-hate relationship with the birds, he formulates a new strategy to trap them on the slope of a coulee dotted with acacias, the thorn trees that are the signature flora of the African bushveld, where even the plants bite. With gunners positioned in a line stretching the length of the slope, Commons leads his team of a dozen beaters in a quick march to surround the birds that we watch slip into the grass and acacia cover. In moments, Commons sounds his horn, signaling that the first birds of the drive are airborne and heading for the guns. This time, the ambush works. Guns pop below the hill as Cook and Welker bring several of the helmeted guineafowl to earth. The bird's name derived from the plates on their head, which look like German Pickelhaube helmets worn in World War I. Commons' horn soon becomes a serenade as the mother load of birds takes flight like a guinea migration. And in the distance, he conducts his orchestra of beaters to close ranks by waving his flushing stick hither and yon to keep the birds from breaking back through the line of beaters. A flock of 20 guineas swing overhead, intermittently flapping and gliding as they head for distant covers. I pull one of the birds down, tipping it with the first barrel and finishing the job with the second. I quickly reload as more birds approach. This time, a double falls to my reports, and in the distance, Cook and Welker busily intercept birds of their own. This time, Commons gets the best of the birds. "We got the guinea bastards that time," he proclaims with a smile as he marches out of the field like a victorious football coach. Guineafowl shooting doesn't enjoy the esteem of, say, driven grouse on the Scottish moors. But that could simply be because those who have seen the veld come alive with the sight of hundreds of airborne guineas aren't telling anyone. While guinea shooting is one of the world's great wingshooting endeavors, Commons has also secured many parcels rich in francolin. The Swainson's, a bird roughly the size of a hen pheasant and equally as presentable as table fare, is the most prevalent in the region. The methodical style of Commons pointers make them easy to follow, and in one morning alone they produce nearly 30 birds over point, showcasing yet another form of wing shooting Commons offers on his diverse menu. Each of the party rotates shooting chances, captivated by the mesmerizing dog work and feathers-in-your-face flushes. Despite offering an abundance of waterfowl, francolin, doves, pigeons, and driven guineas, South Africa might still be the wing shooting world's best-kept secret. And for double-barrel aficionados like me, that's just fine. Epilogue. After a more than 20-year absence from South African wing shooting, I returned last year and joined Trevor and Colette and their son, Clayton, who is now running the wing shooting business. It was as if I had returned in time to my inaugural South African wing-shooting foray, for I shot several of the same areas Trevor and I prospected 2 decades earlier. The dogs had changed, and so had the shooting. Remarkably, it had gotten better. While Tyndall is gone, part of the post-apartheid redistribution of land ownership, Clayton's Umdende Safaris operates in some of the best bird areas throughout South Africa, employing a series of beautiful lodges within short driving distance of epic upland bird and waterfowl shoots. No matter where Colette prepares her meals, they remain extraordinary in every sense. As I sat in a duck blind the last night of my return voyage, it was heartening to see something in the hunting world that had improved. A memory that hadn't faded but rather brought optimism for a new dawn, one I hope to share with many friends as they come to know how special this place and these people truly are. A blitz of Scottish pheasants. Double barrels, single malts, and clouds of birds befit this royal pageant of pomp and gunpowder. If driven shooting has a heartland, Scotland would be in it. Its steep hills and tight valleys are an ideal prescription for presenting ever-challenging shooting for sports who revel in towering birds with a tailwind. It's the land that helped turn an obscure day in the middle of August into the International Day of the Grouse. In case you're wondering how and are looking to win a bar bet the next time you enjoy a pint in a British pub, it was the Game Act of 1773 that closed the season for grouse between the 10th of December and the 11th of August. Since that time, the opening of the season on the glorious 12th has lured the tweed and double gun set from all corners of Europe and the Americas. With its abundance of heather and red grouse, Scotland's undulating moors echo with gunfire each autumn as double guns intercept grouse as they have since George III sat on the throne. It is an annual ritual celebrated by the London best set who relish the rarefied air of the sport and who enjoy shooting a truly wild bird with a life force so strong that it will not succumb to domestication. While the object of a pheasant and partridge shoot is to reach maximum distance between bird and gun, grouse often prefer to hug the rolling Scottish terrain like fighter jets flying below radar. By using speed and the element of surprise, grouse are notorious for presenting whiplash shots. Indeed, if you're assembling a line for grouse shooting, be sure to include a chiropractor. Therein lies their appeal as a target, for they offer plenty of challenge to gunners not afraid of being humbled. And while the blue sky rule of making sure birds are high enough to avoid inadvertently hitting a beater or fellow shooter is mandatory with pheasant and partridge, grouse are often shot relatively low to the ground because that is where they commonly fly. Keeping your cheek pushed firmly to a gunstock, however, is the tricky part of the grouse shooting equation because the tendency is to lift one's head with low targets as they are normally passed during other driven shoots. If you wait for blue sky during a grouse shoot, you might as well bring your binoculars and extend your bird watching to other species on the moor. If their approach weren't difficult enough, the rusty brown color of the grouse tends to blend well with the dark background of the moors, adding even more challenge to grouse shooting. Grouse, furthermore, are fickle. Weather conditions during the nesting season are everything to grouse production, for cold and wet conditions can be lethal when the chicks are little more than a bumblebee in size. A string of tough breeding seasons in the 1990s and again in 2018 and 2019 made the pheasant shoots all the more inviting, for the ringneck isn't too proud to flourish under chicken wire and heat lamps. Good pheasant beats begin with sound poultry science. The birds are hatched in incubators and raised in pens for several weeks, until such time as they're ready to mature in the managed cover of shooting estates. It is the only method to consistently provide birds for the gun, in numbers that can stagger the rough shooter's imagination. Thus, while grouse are coveted for the premium shooting that they afford, only cultivated pheasants and partridge aren't impacted by the vagaries of British weather. This form of shooting is not to be confused with hunting, at least not in the walk the CRP fields of the American prairies sense. It will never replace an autumn day hiking solo with a favorite gun dog through cover, the feeling of accomplishment at taking a cagey late-season rooster or grounding a skittish grouse before it's swallowed by a jungle of alder and aspen. Nor will it be a substitute for a memorable morning in which you had to break ice to reach a duck blind, the same dawn that saw flock upon flock of decoying mallards accept your decoy invitations. It won't make you forget your formative years as a shotgunner either. The intoxicating potion of a Model 12, double A's, and pigeons flying like missiles from a barn at treetop height. No, those are all indelible parts of many a wing shooter's development, but the classic European shoot will, for a few days, give you the sense that you've arrived as if the glass slipper fit and you've been invited to the ball through Providence. That feeling lasts until you receive your final bill anyway. The wind is blowing about 30 miles an hour and raining horizontally, as if we're heading to the first beat via the inside of a car wash. I join a group of fellow American sports for my first day of driven in Scotland. We are positioned in a shallow valley just below a steep bank that looks like it suffered a generation of erosion from the island's incessant rainfall. It's the reason locals don waxed cotton as commonly as Americans wear blue jeans. The terrain is perfectly designed to give the birds added elevation before they take flight over the guns by driving them, lemming-like, off the surrounding cliffs. Despite the deluge that would normally hamper a pheasant's primaries, these birds are exceptionally strong flyers, towering above us, first in singles and then in twos and threes, building to a steady stream of targets. As the peak of the beat arrives, steam rises from my gun barrels as precipitation hits them, making it appear as if the barrels of my Berettas are newly minted, smoldering out of a forge. I try to distinguish passing birds from the raindrops that accumulate on my glasses each time I tilt back to fire a second barrel. My loader, meanwhile, a 30-something farmer from the area, snaps 2 more cartridges into my second gun as a mixture of Hungarian partridge and pheasants suddenly appears from behind the curtain of the hill I'm facing. The hope is to fire twice at approaching birds, hand the first gun to the loader, grab the second over and under, and shoot twice more at birds directly overhead or just past. That is the formula for maximum success. And when the heart of the wave of birds is over you, there is no problem finding targets. It's always easy to spot the newbies to the game, however, for they inevitably fumble the exchange with their loader, dump shells on the ground, and generally look robotic in their mount swing shoot motion. Veterans of driven, however, appear remarkably fluid and never rushed as they rain birds with high percentages. It only takes money and practice to be in that class. Plenty of both. The partridges are deceivers, like minis in a sporting clays course, seemingly flying much faster than the ringnecks that appear as lead blockers for speedier running backs in a football line. In actuality, however, it is the pheasants that move faster. The small size of the Hun often confuses most shots, the subterfuge of the presentation being like a pitcher throwing a mix of changeups and fastballs. There aren't enough partridge in the drive to recalibrate my swing and consistently adjust to their difference in speed from pheasants, all part of the optical confusion orchestrated by any hunt master worth his kidney pie. Nevertheless, I managed to intercept several birds, which has less to do with the quality of my shooting than it does the sheer volume of lead I launched skyward. To my left, Floridian Griff Jenkins shows no signs of sharing my erratic shooting symptoms, so it's evident that my condition isn't contagious. The downburst clears in time for our second drive. On the surface, witnessing the first sunlight of our trip to Scotland, Celtic for Soggy Island, might seem a welcome development. That is the case until I draw the stand facing into the 11 a.m. sun, the same direction from which the wind-blown pheasants will appear. I change to the darkest lenses that I have and raise my hand in a half-hearted salute to the sun in an attempt to shield its laser rays from my eyes as I wait for the beat to begin. The birds start taking flight, passing through the sun, at which point I lose them. Then I pick them up again just above me as my vision is suddenly full of dark spots. It's as if I've been staring at an arc welder or a solar eclipse. I try to finesse my angle away from direct sunlight, but the birds appear as little more than several of many sunspots on my pupils. The beaters work the hillside above us covered with a copse of pines reminiscent of the windbreaks once planted across the American plains to keep the topsoil from blowing into another dust bowl. I can see the birds congregating on the edge of the tree line, fidgeting back and forth as they contemplate their escape routes, with approaching beaters and dogs on one side and a line of guns on the other. The first bird out is an outlandishly high rooster that looks as if it's late for an appointment in London. Veteran-driven shooter Dan Searle, however, didn't share my view, an unfortunate development for the pheasant, who picked the one gun to fly over who could take the towering rooster out of the sky. At the completion of the drive, as if some kind of cosmic joke, the clouds and rain return. We retreat to a nearby barn where our host, Wilson Young, pours cups of hot consomme as his son tops off the mugs with sherry. Tabasco being optional for anyone having difficulty ridding themselves of the damp chill that set in with the precipitation. The break is a chance for me to acquaint myself with the rest of the shooters, a group of friends who are allowing me to crash their shooting party. Conversations in these circles normally start with an understanding from where each shooter originates, and if in the small circles of international wing shooting, I might know of anyone from their friend group or hometown. It normally doesn't take long to triangulate to common acquaintances, which is usually a pleasant icebreaker, but not always. "Yeah, I know that son of a bitch," is the refrain you sometimes get. So the verbal dance can be a delicate affair if you're not careful about the way you bring up the potential of a mutual acquaintance. You learn that it's best not to lead with your opinion of someone, merely that you have met them. "I never liked him either." Glad you feel the same way. Tends to rescue such moments so that the rest of the shoot isn't spent looking cockeyed at one another, wondering if the other is a horse's ass too. A third drive pits me in the midst of a stand of trees where I have only a very narrow corridor in which to shoot. I begin wondering what I did to offend Young to be banished to such an obscure position. As I wait for the beat to start, I try to convince myself that shooting birds from this leafy tunnel is not much different than hunting ruffed grouse in my native state of Wisconsin, a Hail Mary form of wing shooting where you often must listen for a thud after the shot because it's the only way to tell if you actually connected with the bird. Many a pointer has returned with a ruff in its mouth after the shooter was certain he had missed. Thus, I channel my early days of ruffed grouse gunning and brace for what may come. In a few moments, gun reports begin popping all around me like opening day of duck season on public waters in Arkansas, the birds remaining as yet invisible from my foliage tunnel. I hold my gun at port arms as pheasants begin darting across my field of view in the time that it takes to merely disengage a safety. If there is going to be shooting to be had, I resign myself. I'm going to have to simply react to the birds as if I'm attempting to hit a Nolan Ryan fastball. Call it what you will, snap shooting, instinctive gunning, or a wing and a prayer. The reflexive shots connect, plummeting poultry all around me as I quench a lustful desire to shoot true. In this instance, the wing shooter's mantra of butt, belly, beak, bang is abbreviated to merely beak, bang, but pays dividends. "That's more like it," says my loader, seeming relieved that he isn't going to have to spend the entire day with an invalid, a question that I'm sure persisted after my first drive. We load up the Rover and head back to Burncastle Lodge, a stunning country home owned by the Duke and Duchess of Northumberland, whose manor is adorned with what looks like museum art, exquisite original oils throughout the estate. Royal hand-me-downs, no doubt. The dwelling is tucked at the foot of one of the region's finest grouse moors. Inside, the Duke's chef prepares a dinner featuring broiled salmon over a watercress and leek sauce, followed by creme brulee. A mix of cocktails before dinner and wine with it makes for a perfect marinade as the evening fades to a pleasant numbness where a firm bed and soft pillow take me to the shooting grounds of my dreams, where tall birds reign with every shot. Tomorrow will bring another chance to train my shotguns, celebrate the hits, laugh at the misses before others do, and remind myself that it's been a long journey from my bird hunting roots of the Midwest to the moors of Scotland. From those beginnings comes my celebration and appreciation of life in the rarefied air of driven shooting. The final bill be damned. Blixt blessings. Shooting in the hills of Idaho presents a New World take on a classic European sport. But is it the royal treatment? What if you could enjoy driven red-legged partridge in stunning and steep terrain, the kind of presentation made famous in the hills of Spain, but without the jet lag? That was the notion of Lars Magnusson, a former shooting instructor turned European-American driven bird raconteur whose Blixton company has built a dedicated following among domestic double gun aficionados. He scoured the American West for just the right mix of open space, cover, and ideal terrain from which to present tall, challenging birds, both red-legged partridge and pheasants. While driven in Idaho might lack the history and pageantry of the European shoots, the Blixt experience includes plenty of strong flying birds and its own take on lodging and dining opulence that is the hallmark of this top-of-the-food-chain venture the world over. For many American shooters who have tried the Blixt Idaho presentation, there are plenty who now forego the time and hassle of flying abroad to enjoy driven birds in exchange for the Blixt blessings. Despite his share of skeptics, Magnuson was able to pull off the unimaginable, for he took a distinctly European endeavor and gave it an American flair, all the while preserving an authentic driven experience. I am one shooter keen to try his offering and bring along my son Luke in our budding Wild Rose British lab, fresh out of university at the training campus near Oxford. Oxford, Mississippi, that is. Blixt and Wild Rose have built an alliance whereby their dogs are used in picking up the thousands of birds shot throughout the course of a driven season. Seems only fitting that British labs would be employed for this most European form of shooting. Our lab Dash is several weeks into the Blixt Wild Rose boot camp, and Luke is eager to reconnect with his pup while she finishes her work at this Dogwarts of sorts, where Wild Rose staff finish their training wizardry thanks to the opportunity for dogs to recover a lifetime worth of birds in just a short season. We head to Teton Valley, Idaho, just over the Wyoming state line, which is a short drive from Jackson Hole. The idyllic mix of rolling hills with poplar and evergreen, stands along the slopes and grain stubble below provides the perfect prescription for driven shooting, and Lars recognized just how ideal it was the instant he saw it. As we arrive at Ground Zero for Blixt, we drive past a compound which consists of a series of private chalets, all part of the beautiful River Rim and Overlook Lodge. Inside the main lodge, we find classic rustic elegance with plenty of comfortable sitting areas and premium art. An open living room with towering ceilings, massive stone fireplace, and commanding views of a small stream below and the Tetons in the distance quickly give you the sense that this venue may not be as good as some of the best shoots in Europe. It may be better, and while Idaho weather is famous for throwing a surprise punch or two, for the most part it is a sunny and arid environment, a far cry from the wind and rain so common on the British Isles. Magnuson is a Swedish immigrant who met his beautiful American wife, Jennifer, fell in love, and together built Blixt as a family shooting business. Their clients have, for the most part, become extended members of the family, returning each autumn to celebrate the latest rendition of Magnuson's Idaho-driven experience. We load up a series of black Range Rovers as the party disembarks from the lodge for a place called Twin Peaks, a picturesque driven destination about a 30-minute drive where the beaters are already waiting. All that is left for us to do is draw pegs, reconnect young Luke with Dash, and begin our first drive of the shoot. I meet my loader, David Johansson, Magnuson's nephew, one of several loaders Lars imported from his motherland. In the distance, Luke notices Dash being handled by Ryan Alderman, the local Wild Rose trainer in residence, and Luke's excitement to reconnect with his pup after a 6-month separation is, well, a hallmark moment. Luke is here to learn from Alderman and work with Dash during the shoot, but this moment is just about a boy and the love of his dog. Driven birds can wait. With my 2 pups reconnected, it is time to focus on incoming birds. First, a trickle of partridge cross in front, the warm-up birds sent to see how much rust there is on your swing. Soon, waves of the birds zip overhead as gunfire echoes through the valley in the heat of the drive. These are true red-legged partridge brought in as eggs from France. They're hatched and raised stateside before being released on the Blixt grounds. Unlike many shoots across the U.S. that use the word driven or simulated driven in their descriptions, the Blixt experience is the true form of the sport. That is, the birds are scattered throughout the fields and are pushed over the guns by a line of flag-toting beaters, which provides the most authentic driven shooting experience on the North American continent. What you get are strong flying birds that have spent plenty of time in the air and know the terrain and how to use it. The retrieving firm of Alderman, Dorsey, and Dash is putting on a show of their own as the young dog learns to handle for Luke and Ryan, spends time training both. The Wild Rose method is about producing true gentleman's gun dogs under control at all times. What you notice quickly with a Wild Rose dog is the intelligence and, to my sensibilities, ideal size, often 50 to 60 pounds. These are dogs that work well in the water, but won't flip a canoe. As well as in the uplands, a key reason that we wanted one in the first place. Mike Stewart is the patriarch of the operation. He's a tall, professorial type who has built his kennel into the brand for premium Labradors and has developed a roster of disciples who train both at home base in Oxford, as well as kennels throughout the country. They're coaches and teachers, skilled ones at that. Sometimes a drive aligns perfectly with your shooting strength, with large numbers of birds passing through your gunning sweet spot. The second beat of the day is just such an occasion for me. As a left-hand shooter, left-to-right crossing shots, pulling the stock into my face on the swing, has long been my favorite target. By favorite, I mean I hit most of what I shoot at, and am comfortable with the long shots and extended leads that would intimidate most. Play the game as long as I have, and you should develop some proficiency, or try golf. Partridge after partridge crosses in my groove, the dead birds starting to stack up in the line of trees ahead of me. I feel like Sammy Sosa being pitched a steady diet of inside fastballs at a home run derby. After Luke and Dash complete their mop-up, we head to a field lunch where white canvas tents with wooden floors and an elegantly set table is waiting for us. It is a Western spin on the driven experience, a glamping affair amid a stand of aspen, complete with a gourmet lunch under beautiful cobalt skies, with lemon drop poplar leaves shimmering in the breeze. And did I say there are hammocks for those who want to have a siesta before returning to the afternoon shoots? Still reveling in the success of the last drive, the first beat following lunch finds me at the bottom of a hill sandwiched between two tall stands of aspen. My shooting window is about a bus length wide and the birds are tall. Stretch your barrels long. It also seems as if someone is goosing them as they rocket overhead, for somehow they manage to engage another gear, propelling them faster than I remember the species being able to motivate. No one said it was going to be easy. The variety of beats offered across Magnuson's territory is impressive, with more than 50 different drives in a wide range of terrain, testament to both the landscape and his use of it. There is gently rolling farm country as well as another property with steep canyons that will test even the most experienced driven shooters. By test, I mean humble. As hard as it is to admit, some birds are simply out of my range, at least my range shooting modified choke 20s. I suppose I could have added a scope and switched to slugs, but such abridgments are seldom forgiven. I'm pretty comfortable with long-range shooting, having done so much of it over 30 years of shotgunning across our wondrous planet of birds, including more than 30 trips to Argentina. But one particular presentation at the Canyon property is better for bird watching than shooting. Full choke or not. It's okay to be humbled once in a while, however, just so long as there isn't a steady diet humble pie. Magnuson saves his best for last. As we start the final beat, the sky is suddenly covered with hundreds, if not more than 1,000 partridge and pheasants, as if some kind of impromptu upland migration. It is a moment that you wish could become slow motion to savor and extend it in all its glory. Wouldn't it be grand if such a scene could last for an hour or two? Hell, days for that matter, I think to myself. Every great beat has a climax when overwhelming numbers of birds cover the sky, and you frenetically scramble to maximize the richness of the opportunity. When it ends, and it must, there's either the satisfaction of having shot well or a frustration in missing an opportunity to be a king for a day. At Blixt, you can count on the royal treatment either way. A Magyar rapture. Past is prologue when it comes to old world-driven pheasants in the forests and fields of Hungary. Dawn breaks clear and cold, frozen puddles line our walk into the woods as the group of 7 guns eases quietly into position like a military unit before an ambush. Soon the first pheasant beat will begin. The idea is to slip into position without alerting the birds of our presence. Otherwise, they are apt to fly from us rather than over us. It's relatively flat in this stretch of Hungary, so it's the trees that will give the birds elevation, for they'll climb above them to avoid the approaching onslaught of the beaters and their dogs. For the line of shooters, we'll need to ignore the tree limbs, get a line on the birds, and swing through them as we time our shots as they pass overhead through a narrow opening in the forest created by the dirt track on which we are standing. As I arrive in position, I begin surveying my shooting lanes such as they are, check the distance between guns and gauge whose birds I can poach on either side of me. Then I work to settle my nerves in anticipation of waves of cackling pheasants that are soon to darken the Hungarian skies. Suddenly a horn sounds in the distance, signaling the start of the drive and the freedom to shoot at will. Sometimes at the end of a particularly good beat, there is a broken arrow moment when the line has been overrun and it feels as if reinforcements are needed purely for self-preservation. We should be so lucky. To my left is Peter Horn, the leader of these American conscripts. He and his Hungarian business partner, Tony Torok, have been organizing all manner of shooting, driven boar and pheasant, as well as hunting for stags, fallow, mouflon, and roebuck throughout Hungary and Romania for decades. Horn is the unofficial American hunting ambassador to all things Hungarian sporting. He operates out of the Beretta Gallery in Manhattan, a premium gun-selling front for his passion business of international sporting travel. As the first birds tower toward us, they fly through Horn's airspace. Big mistake. The left-handed shooter folds the birds hard, none of those flapping pheasants merely tickled with the fringe of the pattern. Soon the whole line is engaged as mayhem ensues with pheasants flying everywhere and loaders yet to get their rhythm with the shooters, fumbling a bit with shells and guns until getting in sync with their sports. "Come on, load 'em up," says Horn in the heat of the first drive, with birds passing overhead as his loader struggles with cold fingers to inject the cartridges cleanly. Given the volume of birds, it pays to keep one eye skyward for incoming opportunities and one looking out for plummeting birds, be they yours or those dropped by adjacent shooters. Indeed, learning to duck when shooting driven pheasants here is a key to self-preservation. The inaugural drive sets the tone for the rest of the shoot. Despite plenty of optimism that there would indeed be an abundance of birds, the volume was nothing short of astonishing, bordering on ridiculous. As luck would have it, I am completely okay with either. For veteran-driven shooters, it's all about the presentation, and while the flat terrain of Hungary doesn't create the challenges of hilltop shooting found on the British Isles or Spain, there are nevertheless plenty of tall birds. Thus, passing on the easy pickings for the more difficult shots is a matter of a shooter's preference. That is, you can make the shoot as difficult or simple as you wish. If it's sheer targets you're after, however, you'll be hard-pressed to see more than what Hungary offers. Driven shooting, of course, isn't to be confused with hunting, for it is an orchestrated event where the only outcome in question is how many birds will pass over you and how well you'll shoot. For a Midwest kid who grew up hiking all day behind a setter to scratch down a rooster or two, the driven experience is foreign in every sense of the word. The pheasants are a key part of the revenue stream necessary to maintain the forest habitat. Sports pay for the privilege to shoot birds, and the game, in turn, is sold at market as yet another form of income to pay the wages of the forestry company charged with managing the land. Harvesting timber and hunting for boar, stag, fallow, and other big game, as well as pheasants, are all part of why this land hasn't been converted to some other use. Because it brings badly needed foreign currency. That's Horn's story, and he's sticking to it. Having shot driven birds throughout the British Isles, Denmark, Spain, the Czech Republic, Hungary, the US, and even in Africa for guineafowl, each line of guns develops its own personality. When you know most of the sports in the line, it becomes a shared memory, the long shots, the misses, and the birds you poach from your friends, as well as the jokes and laughter you share afterward. Joining Horn and I on the foray are Joe and John Paul Clayton. I first met Joe during a driven boar shoot in Hungary several years earlier when he ran Dish Corporation in Denver. Flip Flippin, an old Texas friend and avid hunter, and Dr. Kip Schumacher, a medical practice developer from Louisiana, are two more of our party. Flip and Kip, and those aren't stage names, once hosted me for a bucket list experience of frog gigging at Schumacher's private Louisiana retreat. Also joining this party is Chip Bryan, with whom I've enjoyed other driven shoots throughout Hungary. You read that right. The line consists of, among others, Flip, Kip, and Chip. What starts as a polite shoot focusing only on birds in our shooting lanes quickly devolves into a poaching fest of historic proportions, which is saying something given this driven crowd's penchant for such. I start by focusing on birds I can intercept before they get to horn, and to my right, Flippin does the same to me. It's not a question of safety, but decorum sometimes goes out the window when the shooting party knows each other well. It often starts with one poached bird, followed by retaliation, then a small wager as to who can take the most birds, and, well, you know the rest of the story. Then the younger Clayton, positioned one peg removed from his father, takes the opportunity to intercept birds headed for his dad. What elevates poaching to an art form in driven circles is the ability to take your neighbor's bird but an instant before he is about to shoot. John Paul does exactly that on a rooster that is beelining for Joe just as it reaches his shotgun range. Do you see that, says Joe, turning to his loader, that little snot. Soon Pops is returning the favor, unleashing the wrath of his top-end Berettas on any bird that even thought about approaching his son's zone. Sometimes the allure to shoot your neighbor's birds is so distracting that you neglect to take birds in your own lane. The Claytons' laughter echoes down the line as we all know what is happening, even as we focus on our own birds. The Fraternal Order of Poachers Anonymous retreats to the lodge after the high-volume, hot-barreled day of shooting. As ever, there is plenty of ribbing and laughter as the group shares stories from the day's highlight reel. Gentle roasting and a few wagers over a pint and goulash, the paprika-laden national dish of Hungary, is a time-honored conclusion to field days here. It's the memories from these moments that stay with me whenever I think of this wonderful land, its people, and the friends with whom I've shared the experience. May time, health, and wealth allow us to return. Somebody say amen. Part of the magic of the Hungarian shooting experience is the chance to visit Budapest, one of the wondrous cities of Europe. The world, actually. It's a rich melting pot of races owing to the many occupations over the last 1,000 years. Hungarians are kind souls and are most welcoming, and they've been like this ever since I started traveling here as a college student in the 1980s. But thanks to the collapse of the Soviet Union, this country, like all of Central Europe, has enjoyed a newfound prosperity and freedom out from under the oppression of party rule. As international wing shooters, we're doing our part to make sure the locals discover the virtues of American currency. Every driven day in Hungary, be it for big game or birds, ends with the tableau de chasse, an elaborate display of the fallen game presented in rows across a field. Often at the center is a bonfire, and evergreen boughs rim the fringe of the presentation. It's a moment of reflection designed to honor the birds, a sober and ancient ritual that reminds us how lucky we are not to be a pheasant in Hungary. There is much to remember from this Hungarian foray to savor the sport of kings, but mostly it is the smiles, laughter, and kinship that remains. That and the memory of those who, sadly, will never again make the journey. Epilogue. I think about this shoot often as Joe Clayton passed away in 2019 after a short battle with pancreatic cancer. He was a larger-than-life media giant who at his core was just a good Irish Catholic boy from Kentucky who savored fine shotguns, good bourbon, and memorable company. We cottoned to each other because fun happened anywhere Joe appeared, and it didn't take a lot of prompting to get him to play the spoons or to sing Dixie, or both. And the more public the setting, the greater the likelihood he would do it. To Joe Clayton we toast, until we meet again. Yorkshire's Purple Rain. When the moors are covered with blooming heather, it's time for the annual dance with the king of driven birds. The four of us have been plotting, scheming, and planning for several years to shoot driven grouse. But the usual conspirators of family obligations, work interruptions, and minor health hiccups forever seem to waylay our efforts. Thus, as we finally find ourselves having dinner at the Black Swan Hotel in Helmsley, the unofficial hub of North Yorkshire's grouse moors, the mere fact that we finally arrived seems like a moral victory, no matter what the grouse gods deliver. The night before our shoot is set to commence, I join the father-son tandem of South Africans Alistair and Alex McLean, and mutual friend and fellow Denver resident Joe Clayton. As we finally pull off the impossible, we coordinate our schedules to meet across the pond to shoot driven grouse. For three of us, it is our baptism into this most hallowed of pursuits, the shooting world's black tie event. Greeting us the next morning is Alex Maiden and Will Criddle of Criddlefield Sports, a company that brokers and arranges all manner of shooting opportunities across the British Isles and throughout the European mainland. In other words, they trade in addictions as the kind of sport they sell is something of a narcotic for the double gun crowd in need of a regular fix of burnt powder. Both are affable sorts who, for this shoot, are juggling a mixed line originating from Ireland, France, England, and of course, South Africa and America. Occasionally shoots with such disparate lines and in something of a rugby scrum, generally owing to the evenness of the bag, political persuasions, and amount of wine consumed at lunch. For now, however, we are on our best behavior, for it is a perfect morning for grouse, the heather is in full bloom, and gamekeepers are reporting an abundance of birds. If you're going to shoot driven grouse for the first time, you might as well arrive during optimal conditions. I'll take my Irish luck any time that I can get it, and I've noticed over the years that St. Hubertus tends to shine on first-timers. Of all the driven shooting offered on this planet, grouse on the Scottish and English moors is the most celebrated, like golf at Augusta or St. Andrews. Good years for grouse production are something akin to wine vintages. Some are better than others, so when the conditions are optimal, savor it for the bounty that it is. That is exactly what we intend to do. We arrive to our first moor, the sweeping hills of heather, looking like they need a yellow brick road to take us to the Emerald City of Oz. To think one of the world's great game birds originates in such stunning cover partly explains the allure of August and September on the moors. The other is the sheer brilliance of the bird that flies in flocks, roller coastering over the undulating terrain with ever-increasing speed as they scream downslope with the boost of gravity. As the first birds of the beat head my way, I can see them hundreds of yards ahead. I repeat the mantra of 2 shots out front, change guns, and take 2 behind. Every muscle in my body is taut, like I'm a jack-in-the-box waiting to spring from the stone butt and introduce my Italian doubles to these most British of birds. Seconds seem like minutes, and despite plenty of time to prepare, I underestimate the speed of the birds and come up too late. I fold one bird out front and nearly screw myself into the ground trying to catch up to a second bird as the flock rockets overhead. The faint call of the birds sounds strangely like a chuckle, which seems appropriate given my drunken pirouette. Soon more birds are approaching up and down the line, and I focus on redemption. This time I stand early and pick off one bird in 2 shots out front and another bird going away with the first barrel of the second gun. I suddenly realize that most of the birds that are now airborne are heading to my butt. The rest of the line of guns stretching below me become spectators for the moment. What a perfect time to take a pair of doubles. Oh, how I wish I had. Instead, I scratch one out front and a single in back yet again. Upon careful inspection, a red grouse looks very much like a ptarmigan that hasn't yet exchanged its dark plumage for its ermine coat of winter. The birds are closely related, and like grouse the world over, they're extremely wild. Their habitat can be managed and their predators controlled, but that is as close to domestication as they will accept. The rest is up to Mother Nature and the weather conditions to determine what kind of fall flock will exist amid the heather. If our first beat is any indication, the reports of good numbers of birds throughout the Yorkshire moors isn't fake news. "You were in a good spot," says Clayton as we head to the next beat. "How far were you leading those birds?" "Mostly not enough," I offer. "I think I'll try missing in front from now on." Next time I'm positioned between an Englishman and an Irishman, and the pegs are a bit closer together than the previous beats. I am a veteran pot stirrer owing to being the youngest in a family of 9 kids, where self-preservation was often a matter of pitting one sibling against another so that I didn't face the wrath of either. I think the youngest of large families are commonly graduates of the school of Machiavelli. I wager that a small international incident might spice up the shoot a bit. As I size up the shooting lanes, I am feeling confident that I can intercept grouse heading to the butts on either side of me. Soon birds begin arriving and I test the theory, first shooting a pair just a second before the Englishman is about to fire. I don't make eye contact with him, but I'm certain he spun to me and could see my grin. Next, I do the same to the Irishman, dropping a lone bird as it was breaking through his firing lane. Now the games are on, my line neighbors take turns attempting to pluck my birds before I get to them. "Those are my grouse, Yank," says the Englishman with a bellicose laugh, having just dropped a bird that nearly hit me. Not to be outdone, the Irishman proves he can stretch his barrels as well and pops a pair of birds in the center of my shooting lane, a hell of a long way out, I may add. "So sorry, where does your birds?" Soon mere acquaintances become friends, part of the time-honored brotherhood of driven poachers. An old Scotsman on one of my inaugural driven shoots advised that it's important to dispense early with the formalities when driven shooting. You just have to trust that your line mates will share your sense of humor and payback. As we leave the field together, I can't resist. "Did you hear the one about the 2 Irishmen, 2 Americans, and 2 Englishmen who are shipwrecked on a deserted island?" I say to them. Within a month, the Irishmen are distilling whiskey, the Americans are selling it at their bar, and the Englishmen are drinking on opposite sides of the pub because they haven't yet been properly introduced. Nice to meet you both. That night at the Black Swan, I regroup with my traveling troupe and have a toast to the day's shoot before wandering down the cobblestone streets of Helmsley to a nearby restaurant purported to be the finest in town. We enter and are informed that there will be a wait of undetermined duration, but we can see several empty tables in the main dining room, which seems suspicious. Nevertheless, we sit in the small waiting room, watching the others enjoy attentive service and what looks to be a delicious mix of entrees. We're feeling a bit like Tiny Tim peering through the window of luxury restaurant. About a half hour passes and Clayton decides he's salivated long enough. He chooses to speed up the seating process in his own indomitable fashion. "How about a little John Denver?" he says to us with a wry smile, as if to say, "Watch this. Country roads take me home to the place." He doesn't so much sing as he wails the tune throughout the restaurant like a jukebox in need of a tune-up. Soon we are seated. The second morning breaks clear and cool, another banner day for our second visit to the moors. There is a bit more terrain to this shoot, the hills rising higher and falling farther than the previous day, which means even more challenging shooting. Instead of the birds hugging the ground as they whisk their way downslope, they tower high overhead as they gain speed. It is very different shooting than what the first day delivers, yet another of the charm found with driven grouse and the varied land they inhabit. While many grouse shots can be low, much lower than pheasants and partridge, swinging with land behind a bird is unnerving to many first-time grouse shooters because the general rule is always to make sure there's blue sky under a bird for safety's sake. Shooting a beater is considered poor etiquette and tends to shorten the duration of your stay. When firing at grouse, it's about understanding where the beaters are and stopping your swing before crossing them with gun barrels. My beat is slow, so I mostly watch the McLean tandem take turns sharing a butt as they make the most of their opportunities. Farther up the line, Clayton finds himself in the thick of the drive with the greatest volume of birds coursing over his end of the line. There is a poetry to watching skill-driven shooters time their rise, swing, and shoot along with their transfer to the second gun. There's a groove to the cadence when a shooter and his guns and loader all come together to execute with precision. Despite the years that it took us to finally reach the moors together, it provides a few glorious days that time hasn't managed to fade. While Robert Frost was convinced that nothing gold can stay, truth is, it can if it's a memory you never let go. I intend to savor this one until I head to the moors on the other side. Perhaps I'll shoot better then. Danger birds. But I don't want to shoot an elephant. It starts as a simple bird hunt. We stop the Land Rover and uncase our guns, and soon a trio of pointers is kicking up dust contrails ahead of us. Before the hunt has a chance to develop any rhythm, however, one of the trackers brings word that there's a herd of perhaps a dozen elephants just ahead. Dung piles the size of anthills and a trail of broken tree branches litter their path, for an elephant is something of a tornado with feet. An entire caste of lesser mammals, however, depend on elephants to push, pull, yank, or knock food within reach. With the news, professional hunter Steve Seward swaps his 12-gauge for a .416 bolt action, a gun whose lipstick-sized 400-grain cartridges are good medicine for unpredictable pachyderms. Our hunt continues, but the character of it changes. I spend more time scanning the acacias ahead for signs of tuskers than I do watching the dogs for bird work. We are hunting in the 1.2 million acre Save Conservancy in southern Zimbabwe, and the elephants come from Gonarejo National Park near the Mozambique border. It's there that guerrilla troops armed with Soviet-supplied AK-47s poach them for meat and ivory. The elephants haven't forgotten and are noticeably more aggressive than their kind from more protected regions. Like the elephant, the black rhino, one of the most endangered beasts on the planet, also is suffering at the hands of poachers ravaging the underfunded national parks. In a historic response, the Zimbabwe government moved the animals to more secure private holdings such as Save, a place where each rhino is followed by an armed game scout. It was a move that undoubtedly prevented the extirpation of the nation's rhinos. Seward blows his dog whistle regularly, announcing our presence in advance to give the elephants ample time to stay well ahead of us. As we fixate on pachyderms, Swempy, a liver and white pointer whose name translates to Koki francolin in the Shona language, makes game. Another pointer, Rigby, follows suit, cornering a small covey of Shelley's francolin under the tentacle-like branches of a young, less than 200-year-old baobab tree, the massive plants that look as if they're upside down, roots protruding skyward. I miss an easy straightaway but connect on a cock partially obscured behind cover. The dogs introduce us to 3 more coveys as we complete our circle back to the rover, elephant-free. I've never considered bird hunting in the realm of stalking dangerous game, but want to avoid being collateral damage to the wingshooting activity. The next morning begins at sunrise when we strike off in the rover in search of guineas, the flock fowl that shares little behavior with your grandmother's yard birds. They are, to be sure, the most elusive of African game birds, notorious for running like purse snatchers. The birds are sometimes found in flocks numbering in the hundreds. Seward's notion is to surround the birds with a crew of beaters and drive them toward a line of guns. Sounds straightforward enough, but orchestrating a successful drive is an art form on the order of herding tumbleweeds. When it works, however, the wingshooting world knows nothing sweeter. An airborne guinea is an imposing target, black bombers that can absorb hefty loads of pellets and that deceive even veterans of driven shooting because of their large size and somewhat awkward flight. Our rover is followed by a pickup transporting a crew of beaters, pointers, and labs. We ride around likely areas of the bush until we spy a flock of guineas in the distance. With birds located, the driving team is positioned by Seward, who deploys them with the precision of a military commander about to send troops into combat. The contingent loops well behind the birds as the fowl scratch and peck through the veld in search of seeds and insects, as yet oblivious to our presence. Seward, meanwhile, leads his line of guns, which includes John and Tina Dunlap, a California couple making their 9th trip to Zimbabwe to get their annual fix of driven guinea shooting. Once in position, Seward radios the beaters to begin the procession. A driven guinea drive is most often a feast or famine affair, and the effort sometimes seems as practical as shoveling water. Nevertheless, enough such maneuvers succeed to command repeat attempts. Which would this drive be, I ask myself? In the distance, perhaps 100 yards ahead, the nervous clicking chatter of guineas builds in a crescendo, letting us know that they have tweaked to the beaters and are about to fly. The question is, which way? The flock launches in near unison, a din of wing beats and calls of protest. In moments, the main aggregation of the flock passes down the line to my left, but a trio of birds splits the difference between Tina and me. I focus on the closest of the lot and fold it with my second barrel. A flurry of shots ring from the end of the line, where John intercepts a brace of the escaping birds. In one wave, the 30-minute venture is over, and the guineas are now scattered throughout the bush. Such is the nature of driven guineafowl shooting. It's about making the first drive count, for there isn't likely to be a second with limitless escape cover surrounding us. Point of no return. We return to Seward's tented safari camp near Chinhoyi, a small but bustling hamlet some 2 hours north of the capital of Harare. Southern Africa is littered with luxury lodges these days, catering to tenderfoots from across Europe and North America, places with all the convenience of the Ritz. The true safari experience, not the Disney version, is about tent camps with open fires and warthog on the grill and enough elixir to erode your ties, if even for one night, to the industrial world. It's about stepping back in time to enjoy a simple existence on the land and by the land. As we travel to the next location in search of waterfowl, talk turns to Africa's many fascinating and deadly animals. The most dangerous beast in Africa, says Seward Riley, is the bloody donkey. It's a real surprise when you find one in your headlights as you round a bend at night doing 80 clicks. A professional hunter must be many things, part comedian to know when to lift his client's spirits, part naturalist to answer the myriad questions every bloke passing through his camp feels obliged to ask, part predator to seek out game with stealth, part mechanic to fix the inevitable problems brought about by the rigors of the safari trail, part gunsmith to make sure a hunter's guns, an insurance policy and grocery store rolled into one, are working at all times, and finally, part tour guide to share the enthusiasm of a first-time traveler to the Dark Continent. Seward checks all the boxes. We transition from the uplands to the region's wetlands, for southern Africa's bird wealth includes myriad wildfowl species. The comb duck, a peculiar goose-sized bird with a silver dollar-sized fleshy knob above its bill, is a mainstay of what few waterfowlers exist in Zimbabwe. White-faced, whistling ducks, red-billed teal, and Egyptian geese make up the majority of birds we'll encounter. Our host for an afternoon hunt is David Penny, a young tobacco farmer whose immaculate plantation-style estate hints that there are riches found in the green leaves. Seward informs us that Penny's newly constructed 300-acre impoundment, one of several such wetlands on his property, is a favorite destination for thousands of visiting ducks and geese. Penny's passion for retriever training proves useful as we employ one of his pupils to recover birds. Seward's veteran lab completes the retriever tandem that will be tested this day. Like early season duck hunters in Louisiana who are ever alert for gators, Penny and Seward keep a watchful eye for any crocs that might have moved into the marsh. The lizards are especially hard-mouthed on retrievers. The impoundment resembles a California stock pond, surrounded by arid landscape. A stand of hardwood trees killed by the floodwaters stored by the dam provide wooden perches for both the whistling ducks and Egyptian geese. Our blind sits starkly along the bank of the reservoir, and I convince my host that a decoy spread will be the pièce de résistance for the hunt. Lacking a ready supply of faux birds, we improvise by tying strings weighted by rocks to 20 plastic milk cartons. Judging from the looks shot back and forth between Seward and Penny, the duo is more than a little skeptical of my recommendation. As gracious hosts, however, they indulge my request, if for no other reason than to be able to tell a Yank if the tactic proves futile. I told you so. Like sea ducks duped by black jugs tied to a stringer, the African fowl pitch to the opening left between two circles of containers as if coming to newly minted mason decoys. Vindication comes with each approaching flight, and the Africans taste the virtues of gunning over decoys rather than mere pass shooting. A modified widgeon call completes the adaptations. American waterfowlers are nothing if not inventive, a fact two Africans come to understand, if not appreciate. Viva la Neva. In the world of driven shooting, some would say there's no place like this Spanish retreat of kings. For the Royal Order of Driven Shooters, the exclusive subset of wing shooters who tend to trade in premium guns, estates, private aircraft, and occasionally wives, there is an ongoing debate as to which bird and location presents the greatest rendition of the sport. The tall pheasants of Drummond, the screaming grouse of Tulchin, the acrobatic redlegs of La Nava. Eavesdropping on conversations as I join long-established lines provides a window into a subculture of shooting that owes its origins to the British Isles of the late 1800s. While the toys have changed, it's unlikely the personality of the shoots or the character of the participants differs much today from those of a century ago. I often wonder what servants think as they tend to a dinner table of formally dressed fat cats, discussing their pressing issues of the day, the soaring price of jet fuel, shorted stocks, and why the second barrel of their number 2 Purdy isn't functioning properly. I wonder because I often feel closer to a servant in caste than I do the shooters caught between the upstairs and downstairs of the two worlds. Such positioning brings a disconnected bemusement to hear the Lord's conversations and then see the subtle reactions of the minions. At such times, I feel as if I'm in some sort of Gosford Park or Downton Abbey casting call, and I'm up for the role of either butler or footman. Of all the European hunting and shooting offered from the British Isles to the Hungarian plains to the boreal forests of Russia, Spain's rolling hills and mountains are perhaps the continent's most inviting to the hunter, be it for birds or big game. Couple that with the beautiful and friendly people of this game-rich nation, and you have one of the world's great destinations. I joined Verdera and Vicente outfitters at Javier Madem's famed La Nava. It's not to be confused with a lodge, for it is a premium shooting resort complete with infinity pool and rooms fit for the Ritz, all situated on a hill overlooking the 50,000-acre estate. It is a retreat built for the Fat Wallet Brigade, who have a penchant for driven red-legged partridge. These are chucker-like birds that thrive in the arid countryside of Spain, and during beats rocket from hilltop to hilltop, providing plenty of challenge for even the nimblest of shooters. As we hike into position at the bottom of one of the property's sprawling drainages, I begin to gauge how quick I'll need to be to intercept these gamers as they fly between the slopes in narrow shooting windows. For 15 to 20 minutes, you must have a singular focus on picking up birds quickly as they emerge from over the hill in front of you, or you'll miss the window of time needed to mount, swing, and shoot at a reasonable distance and position. The towering nature of pheasants and the hug-the-ground approach of grouse are different than the shots presented by partridge. A typical red-leg beat starts with a few birds trickling out of cover and builds into a swarm of small targets darting through your line of sight like so many bees. The genesis of the driven shoot coincided with the advent of the breech-loading firearm in the 1870s, when large volumes of birds could be shot in a short amount of time. Royalty would board trains from London and head to estates in the countryside, where an inordinate number of pheasants and Hungarian partridge were raised for these shooting parties. Then it was Spain's King Alfonso XIII, who visited the UK and enjoyed the driven shooting so much that upon his return, he decided to do the same with the red-legged partridge that were found throughout his country. Thus was born Spanish-driven shooting. As I await the beaters to begin the first drive of my shoot, I see dogs and handlers far in the distance, carrying flags that are used to both flush partridge and direct the birds once in flight by spooking them toward the guns. Between that line and the row of shooters exists thousands of partridge milling about the scrub, birds that will soon provide an aerial assault on our position. I am only moments away from my baptism into Spanish-driven partridge. And there is electricity and a bit of nervous anticipation as I await the start of the seminal event. The rhythm created between a shooter and loader is especially important to maximize the gunning opportunities in the heat of a drive. Fumble the handoff of guns and the flow of the shoot is disrupted, and it becomes more difficult to get on birds quickly. The best loaders determine your comfort zone with gun delivery and feed loaded doubles the instant you are ready for them in a position that allows you to fluidly mount and shoot. It's wise to introduce yourself to your loader and discuss any idiosyncrasies and nuances, his and yours, before the shoot begins. I start by letting mine know that I am a left-hand shooter, at which point I get the look of, "No problem, Yank, I've dealt with your kind before." Sufficiently prepped and with the beat commencing, my 50-something loader is a veteran of the game. His shell bag and its rows of paired cartridges are ready for easy deployment, albeit he shifts his setup to my left with the breaking news of my left eye dominance. So rich are these experiences that it's about maximizing every second, for any wasted movement or moment is one less bird in the bag. With the shoot set at a predetermined bag, once that limit is reached, the shoot is complete. The handier you are with a shotgun, the more value you'll derive on a per-bird basis. Spanish-driven partridge are the most expensive birds in the world, commanding a proverbial king's ransom whether you're royalty or not, hence the pedigree of the shooters who enjoy such premium shotgunning. As the red-leg drive hits its stride, the massive flurry of birds overhead is unlike anything I've seen in the driven world. The birds weaving and dodging in an aerial display that confounds shooters who become discombobulated by the sensory overload. Because of the insane abundance of birds, shooters can easily become overwhelmed, losing focus on a single bird before moving on to the next target. It's much like the subterfuge created by a flushing covey of quail, times 10. Pick a bird and stay on it through the shot or succumb to indecision and missed opportunities. I try and remind myself of that in the intensity of the beat, but instead my reaction tends more toward terrier and squirrel, squirrel, squirrel. I find myself pirouetting left and right, attempting to catch up to the partridge that seem to know there is safety in numbers as they take flight in unison to reduce the odds of getting picked off as they streak for the next hilltop. Unlike pheasants that take a straight line, the redlegs sweeping off a distant hilltop use their momentum to gain speed and bank and tilt in flight, oftentimes creating a topsy-turvy target that is both blisteringly fast while at the same time undulating. As hard as I try to mount early and take a bird out front, I invariably find myself mounting ahead only to have to spin around back to catch up to the target. The notion of shooting birds out front with one gun and taking a pair behind with the second gun is plausible in theory, but the strategy doesn't hold up in battle. As the beat ends, all that is left are the corpses of cartridges strewn around me as if I am a tail gunner somewhere over the Japanese-controlled Pacific. I look at the loader with a look of disbelief in the volume of spent ammo. "Who else was shooting?" I say with a smile, and I don't need to know the bird-to-shell ratio. Soon the beaters and their mix of cockers and wire-haired dachshunds are busy mopping up the litter of birds strewn about the cover. With bundles of the birds in each hand, my loader returns to my peg to begin a pile of both birds and spent cartridges. A couple of handlers and their dogs sweep the area to pick up cripples and dispatch the occasional bird still too lively for the dogs to catch. With the impressive beat complete, we stroll a couple hundred yards down the dirt track on which the shooters are positioned and find a large tent with table and chairs set as if some kind of outdoor wedding venue. A series of sausages and steaks of various cut are being grilled as champagne flutes filled to the brim await. The addiction of the pastime becomes abundantly clear in the moment, for having 50 beaters push clouds of birds over you for half an hour, only to follow that with a Michelin-level field, lunch could, as they say, become habit-forming. More beats await in the afternoon as my shooting improves with each successive drive as I embrace the cadence of the shooting and get in sync with my loader. My Beretta 20s prove good medicine for the partridge and seem to enjoy their return to the continent of their origin. Having shot-driven in most of the world where it is offered, I am beginning to understand why this line of international-driven shooting regulars ended their opening evening dinner conversation with the conclusion that the Spanish partridge indeed offer the best of both sport and culture, especially if done at La Nava.